The Persian tribes emerged from the harsh landscape of the Iranian plateau around the 7th century BCE, establishing themselves in the region known as Persis, located in what is now southwestern Iran. These Indo-European-speaking peoples descended from nomadic groups who had migrated southward from the Central Asian steppes centuries earlier, bringing with them a warrior culture and sophisticated understanding of horse breeding and cavalry tactics. The Persians settled alongside their linguistic cousins, the Medes, who had established a more centralized kingdom to the north and west. The early Persian tribes organized themselves into a confederation of clans, each led by hereditary chieftains who maintained allegiance to a paramount king. Archaeological evidence from sites like Pasargadae reveals that these early Persians developed a mixed economy, combining pastoralism with agriculture, utilizing the fertile valleys of the Zagros Mountains to cultivate barley, wheat, and maintain extensive orchards. Their society emphasized truth-telling, archery, and horsemanship, values that would later become central to the Achaemenid imperial ideology. The Median Empire, established by Xerxes in the late 7th century BCE, had grown to dominate much of the Iranian plateau and eastern Anatolia. Under King Astyages, who ruled from approximately 585 to 550 BCE, the Medes maintained suzerainty over the Persian tribes through a system of tributary relationships. The Persians were required to provide military service, tribute payments, and hostages to ensure their loyalty. This arrangement allowed the Medes to project power across a vast territory, while permitting local rulers to maintain internal autonomy. Cyrus II, born around 600 BCE, inherited leadership of the Pasargadae tribe from his father Cambyses I. Ancient sources, including Herodotus and later Xenophon, provide conflicting accounts of Cyrus's early life, with some suggesting he was the grandson of Astyages through his mother Mandane. While these genealogical claims may reflect later propaganda designed to legitimize Persian rule over the Medes, they indicate the complex political relationships that existed between the two peoples. The rebellion that would transform the ancient Near East began around 553 BCE when Cyrus openly defied Median authority. The exact catalyst remains debated among historians, but evidence suggests that Astyages had grown increasingly suspicious of Persian loyalty and may have demanded additional tribute or attempted to replace Cyrus with a more compliant ruler. Cyrus's response demonstrated the military innovations that would characterize Persian warfare for centuries to come. The Persian army that marched against Ecbatana represented a departure from traditional Near Eastern military organization. While maintaining the cavalry expertise inherited from their nomadic ancestors, the Persians had adopted infantry tactics from their settled neighbours, and developed a flexible command structure that could adapt to different battlefield conditions. Cyrus organised his forces into decimal units, groups of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 soldiers, creating a hierarchical system that facilitated both tactical coordination and administrative efficiency. The siege of Ecbatana in 550 BCE marked the decisive moment in the establishment of Achaemenid power. The Median capital, situated on a strategic plateau in the Zagros Mountains, had been fortified with massive walls and defensive towers. However, Cyrus's victory came not through prolonged siege warfare, but through the defection of key Median nobles who had grown dissatisfied with Astyages' rule. The Nabonidus Chronicle, a Babylonian historical text, confirms that Astyages was captured and that his army turned against him, delivering the Median king to Cyrus. Rather than destroying the Median administrative apparatus, Cyrus demonstrated the pragmatic approach that would characterize Achaemenid governance. He retained many Median officials in their positions, adopted elements of Median court ceremony, and presented himself as the legitimate successor to Median authority, rather than a foreign conqueror. This policy of administrative continuity allowed the newly established Persian Empire to maintain stability while expanding its territorial reach. The conquest of Lydia between 547 and 546 BCE represented Cyrus's most audacious military campaign and established Persian dominance over the crucial trade routes connecting Asia and Europe. King Croesus of Lydia, renowned throughout the ancient world for his wealth derived from the gold-bearing sands of the Pactolus River, controlled the western terminus of the Silk Road and the minting of the world's first gold and silver coins. The Lydian capital of Sardis served as a commercial hub, where Greek merchants traded with caravans from Central Asia and India. Croesus had initially viewed the Persian conquest of Media as an opportunity to expand Lydian territory eastward. Ancient sources suggest he consulted the oracle at Delphi, receiving the famous prophecy that if he crossed the Halys River, he would destroy a great empire. The ambiguous nature of this oracle would prove prophetic, though not in the manner Croesus anticipated. The campaign began with Cyrus's army crossing the Halys River, the traditional boundary between Lydian and Median spheres of influence. The first major engagement occurred near Plataea, where Croesus had assembled a coalition force including Greek mercenaries, Babylonian auxiliaries, and Egyptian archers. The battle proved inconclusive, with both armies suffering heavy casualties before withdrawing to their respective territories. Believing that the campaigning season had ended, Croesus dismissed his mercenary forces and returned to Sardis for the winter. This decision reflected traditional Near Eastern military practices, where campaigns typically ceased during the harsh winter months. However, Cyrus demonstrated the innovative thinking that would characterize Persian military doctrine by continuing his advance despite the season. The Persian army that approached Sardis in early 546 BCE had been reinforced with troops from recently conquered territories and equipped with specialized siege equipment. The city's defenses, considered impregnable due to their position on a steep acropolis, had never been seriously tested by a determined enemy. Cyrus employed a combination of direct assault and psychological warfare, using the mobility of his cavalry to cut off supply lines, while his engineers sought weaknesses in the fortifications. The fall of Sardis came through a daring night assault led by a Persian soldier who discovered a poorly guarded section of the citadel wall. The capture of Croesus and the seizure of the Lydian treasury provided Cyrus with the financial resources necessary to fund further expansion while demonstrating Persian military capabilities to potential enemies throughout the region. The treatment of conquered Lydia established precedents that would govern Achaemenid imperial policy for 2 centuries. Rather than imposing direct Persian rule, Cyrus appointed a satrap to oversee the territory while maintaining local administrative structures. The Greek cities of Ionia, which had been Lydian vassals, were required to acknowledge Persian sovereignty but retain their internal autonomy and traditional institutions. The conquest of Babylon in 539 BCE represented the culmination of Cyrus's imperial ambitions and established the Achaemenid Empire as the dominant power in the ancient Near East. The Neo-Babylonian Empire under Nabonidus had grown increasingly unstable due to religious conflicts between the king and the powerful Marduk priesthood. Nabonidus's prolonged absence from Babylon while residing in the Arabian oasis of Timur had disrupted traditional religious ceremonies and alienated the urban population. Cyrus's approach to Babylon demonstrated the sophisticated intelligence networks and diplomatic capabilities that supported Persian military operations. Rather than attempting a costly siege of the heavily fortified city, Persian agents worked to undermine Nabonidus's authority from within. The Cyrus cylinder, discovered in 1879 and now housed in the British Museum, provides contemporary evidence of the Persian king's propaganda campaign, presenting him as the chosen instrument of Marduk, sent to restore proper religious observance. The actual capture of Babylon occurred without significant fighting, as the city's gates were opened by supporters who welcomed Persian rule. The Nabonidus Chronicle records that Cyrus's army entered Babylon peacefully, with the Persian king personally participating in the traditional New Year ceremonies honouring Marduk. This careful attention to Babylonian religious sensibilities contrasted sharply with the destructive conquests typical of Assyrian and Neo-Babylonian warfare. The policy of religious tolerance proclaimed in the Cyrus Cylinder extended far beyond Babylon to encompass all peoples within the expanding Persian Empire. The Cylinder's cuneiform text declares Cyrus's intention to return displaced populations to their ancestral lands and restore their traditional religious practices. This policy represented both pragmatic governance and genuine ideological commitment to the principle that diverse peoples could coexist under Persian rule while maintaining their distinct identities. The liberation of the Jewish exiles represented the most famous application of this tolerant policy. The Babylonian exile, which had begun with Nebuchadnezzar's destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BCE, had displaced thousands of Judeans to various parts of the Babylonian Empire. Cyrus's decree, preserved in the biblical books of Ezra and Chronicles, authorized the return of Jewish exiles to Jerusalem and provided royal funding for the reconstruction of the temple. The Persian approach to governing conquered territories reflected a sophisticated understanding of imperial administration that would influence later empires throughout history. Rather than imposing cultural uniformity, the Achaemenids developed a system that balanced central authority with local autonomy, creating stability through accommodation rather than suppression. This model allowed the empire to expand rapidly while maintaining internal cohesion across vast distances and diverse populations. The establishment of the Achaemenid Empire under Cyrus the Great transformed the political landscape of the ancient world, creating the first truly multicultural empire in human history. The Persian model of governance, with its emphasis on tolerance, administrative efficiency, and respect for local traditions, would endure for over 2 centuries and influence the development of subsequent imperial systems from Alexander's conquests to the Roman Empire. The death of Cyrus the Great in 530 BCE during his campaign against the Massagetae marked a critical juncture for the nascent Persian Empire. The succession passed to his eldest son Cambyses II, who had already demonstrated administrative competence as governor of Babylon during his father's lifetime. Unlike the gradual expansion that had characterized Cyrus's reign, Cambyses inherited an empire that required immediate consolidation while facing the strategic imperative of completing Persian dominance over the ancient Near East. The most glaring omission from Achaemenid control remained Egypt, the wealthy and militarily formidable kingdom that controlled the Nile Delta and maintained extensive trade networks throughout the Mediterranean. Cambyses II ascended to the throne with a clear understanding of the challenges facing the empire. The vast territories stretching from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea required constant attention to prevent rebellion, while the death of the empire's founder had created uncertainty among both Persian nobles and subject peoples. Contemporary sources, including the Behistun inscription and fragments from Babylonian chronicles, indicate that Cambyses spent his first years as king strengthening internal administration and securing the loyalty of provincial governors who might have harboured ambitions for independence. The new king's personality differed markedly from his father's diplomatic approach to conquest. Where Cyrus had emphasized accommodation and religious tolerance, Cambyses displayed a more direct and sometimes harsh approach to governance. Greek historians, particularly Herodotus, portrayed him as increasingly tyrannical, though these accounts must be evaluated carefully given their distance from events and potential bias against Persian rule. Archaeological evidence from administrative archives at Persepolis suggests that Cambyses maintained the essential structure of his father's governmental system while centralizing certain decision-making processes. The strategic importance of Egypt to Persian imperial ambitions cannot be overstated. The 26th dynasty under Pharaoh Amasis had transformed Egypt into a formidable military power, utilizing Greek mercenaries and advanced naval technology to project influence throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Egyptian wealth derived from the annual Nile floods supported a sophisticated economy based on grain production, luxury crafts, and international trade. The kingdom's alliance with Greek city-states and its control of key trade routes made it the primary obstacle to Persian hegemony over the region. Cambyses began systematic preparations for the Egyptian campaign as early as 527 BCE, demonstrating the careful planning that would characterize Persian military operations throughout the Achaemenid period. Intelligence gathering formed a crucial component of these preparations, with Persian agents infiltrating Egyptian territories to assess military capabilities, identify potential allies, and map strategic locations. The king understood that conquering Egypt would require not merely military victory, but also the ability to maintain control over a population with strong cultural identity and religious traditions. The diplomatic groundwork for the Egyptian invasion revealed the sophisticated understanding of regional politics that Persian administrators had developed. Cambyses recognized that the traditional invasion route through the Sinai Peninsula presented significant logistical challenges, particularly regarding water supply for a large army crossing the desert. The Persian solution involved cultivating alliances with Arab tribes who controlled the caravan routes and oasis settlements between Mesopotamia and Egypt. The most crucial of these alliances was negotiated with the Arab chieftain whose territory controlled access to the wells and way stations along the northern Sinai route. Persian diplomatic records, preserved in Aramaic papyri discovered at Elephantine, document the extensive negotiations required to secure safe passage for the invasion force. The agreement included provisions for the Arabs to provide water, guides, and logistical support in exchange for Persian recognition of their territorial claims and substantial payments in silver and luxury goods. These diplomatic arrangements extended beyond mere military convenience to encompass broader strategic considerations. The Arab tribes possessed intimate knowledge of desert warfare and could provide intelligence about Egyptian defensive preparations along the frontier. Their cooperation also denied Egypt potential allies who might have harassed Persian supply lines or provided sanctuary for Egyptian forces seeking to conduct guerrilla operations against the invaders. The Persian army that assembled for the Egyptian campaign represented the full military might of the empire at its disposal. Core Persian and Median units formed the backbone of the force, supplemented by contingents from conquered territories including Lydians, Babylonians, and various Central Asian peoples. The total size of this army remains debated among historians, with estimates ranging from 50,000 to 120,000 soldiers, though the larger figures likely include non-combatant support personnel essential for maintaining such a force in hostile territory. The composition of Cambyses' army reflected the military innovations that had enabled Persian expansion under Cyrus. Heavy cavalry units, equipped with scale armour and long spears, provided shock capability against enemy formations. Persian archers, renowned throughout the ancient world for their accuracy and rate of fire, could deliver devastating volleys against both infantry and cavalry targets. The inclusion of siege specialists and engineers indicated Persian preparation for conducting operations against fortified Egyptian cities. The march across Sinai tested both Persian logistical capabilities and the reliability of their Arab allies. The army moved in carefully coordinated columns, with advance parties securing water sources and establishing supply depots along the route. The successful completion of this desert crossing demonstrated the administrative sophistication that distinguished Persian military operations from the more improvised campaigns typical of earlier Near Eastern armies. Pharaoh Psamtik III, who had recently ascended to the Egyptian throne following his father Amasis' death, found himself facing an unprecedented challenge. The Egyptian military had been reorganized during the 26th dynasty to incorporate Greek mercenary units alongside traditional Egyptian forces. These mercenaries, primarily from Ionia and Caria, brought advanced hoplite tactics and superior metalworking techniques that had given Egyptian armies advantages in previous conflicts with Mesopotamian powers. The Egyptian defensive strategy centered on the fortress city of Pelusium, located at the easternmost mouth of the Nile Delta. This heavily fortified position controlled the primary invasion route into Egypt and had been strengthened with additional walls, towers, and defensive works during Amasis' reign. The city's garrison included the elite units of the Egyptian army, supported by Greek mercenaries and equipped with the latest siege defense technology available in the ancient world. The Battle of Pelusium in 525 BCEE became the decisive engagement that determined the fate of independent Egypt. The Persian army approached the fortress after completing their desert crossing, with Cambyses personally leading the assault on the city's eastern walls. The siege began with traditional bombardment, using catapults and siege towers, but the strength of Pelusium's defences prevented quick victory through conventional assault. The turning point came through Persian psychological warfare that exploited Egyptian religious beliefs. According to Herodotus, Cambyses ordered his soldiers to drive cats, ibises, and other animals sacred to the Egyptians before their battle lines. Whether this account reflects actual events or represents later Greek interpretation of Persian tactics, the battle demonstrated Persian willingness to exploit cultural and religious differences to achieve military objectives. The fighting at Pelusium involved close-quarters combat, as Persian infantry scaled the city walls under cover of archer fire. Egyptian defenders, despite their training and equipment advantages, found themselves overwhelmed by the coordinated Persian assault. The fall of the fortress opened the Nile Delta to Persian penetration and effectively ended organised Egyptian resistance to the invasion. Psamtik III's capture following the battle eliminated the last obstacle to Persian control over Egypt. The young pharaoh, who had ruled for only 6 months, was taken prisoner along with his family and leading nobles. Cambyses' treatment of the captured Egyptian leadership reflected the more severe approach that distinguished his reign from his father's policies of accommodation and mercy toward defeated enemies. The establishment of Persian control over Egypt required careful attention to the kingdom's complex administrative and religious structures. Egypt's governmental system had evolved over 3 millennia to manage the annual Nile flood cycle, coordinate massive construction projects, and maintain the elaborate religious ceremonies that legitimized pharaonic authority. The Persian challenge involved adapting these institutions to serve imperial rather than purely Egyptian interests. Cambyses' adoption of pharaonic titles and customs represented a calculated attempt to legitimize Persian rule in Egyptian eyes. The Persian king participated in traditional coronation ceremonies at Memphis, accepted the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, and commissioned inscriptions presenting himself as the chosen successor to the ancient pharaohs. These actions paralleled his father's approach to Babylonian religious traditions, but required even more extensive cultural accommodation given Egypt's distinctive civilization. The integration of Egypt into the Persian administrative system established the 27th dynasty, marking the first time in Egyptian history that foreign rulers had successfully imposed their authority over the entire kingdom. Persian satraps replaced Egyptian governors in key provinces, while local administrators retained their positions under Persian oversight. This hybrid system allowed for continuity in day-to-day governance while ensuring Persian control over military forces and tax collection. The Persian administration of Egypt demonstrated remarkable adaptation to local conditions and requirements. The annual Nile flood, which determined agricultural productivity and tax revenues, required careful monitoring and coordination that Persian officials learned to manage effectively. The complex irrigation systems that distributed floodwaters throughout the Nile Valley demanded technical expertise that Persian engineers acquired through collaboration with Egyptian specialists. Religious policy in Persian Egypt reflected the broader Achaemenid approach to governing diverse populations while addressing the specific challenges posed by Egyptian theological traditions. The Persian kings maintained the traditional role of pharaoh as divine intermediary between the gods and people, participating in religious ceremonies and funding temple construction projects. This accommodation extended to supporting the powerful priesthoods that controlled vast temple estates and wielded significant political influence. The economic integration of Egypt into the Persian Empire created new opportunities for trade and cultural exchange, while generating substantial revenues for the imperial treasury. Egyptian grain production, enhanced by Persian investment in irrigation infrastructure, supported not only local populations but also Persian military operations throughout the region. The kingdom's skilled craftsmen, particularly those specializing in luxury goods and artistic production, found new markets for their products throughout the expanded Persian territories. The success of the Egyptian conquest established Cambyses as a worthy successor to his father, while demonstrating Persian capability to adapt their governmental methods to radically different cultural contexts. The campaign's completion brought the Persian Empire to its greatest territorial extent under the early Achaemenid kings, stretching from the Indus River to the Nile Valley and encompassing virtually all the major civilizations of the ancient Near East. However, the extended Egyptian campaign created new challenges for imperial administration. Cambyses' prolonged absence from the Persian heartland, combined with the concentration of military resources in Egypt, created opportunities for internal dissent and rebellion. The king's increasingly autocratic behaviour, documented in both Persian and Egyptian sources, suggests that the pressures of governing such a vast and diverse empire were beginning to strain the Achaemenid governmental system. The mysterious circumstances surrounding Cambyses' death in 522 BCE while returning from Egypt precipitated the most serious crisis in early Achaemenid history. Contemporary sources provide conflicting accounts of the king's demise, with some suggesting accidental death from the sword wound, and others implying suicide following news of rebellion in the Persian heartland. The absence of a clear succession plan and the army's distance from Persia created a power vacuum that threatened to destroy the empire that Cyrus and Cambyses had built. The emergence of Gaugamela, claiming to be Bardia, Cambyses' younger brother, represented either a legitimate succession dispute or an elaborate usurpation attempt that exploited the confusion surrounding the king's death. The pretender's ability to seize control of key Persian territories while Cambyses' army remained in Egypt demonstrated the vulnerabilities inherent in governing such an extensive empire with the communication and transportation technologies available in the ancient world. The death of Cambyses II in Syria during his return from Egypt created the most perilous moment in early Achaemenid history. The empire that had expanded from the Iranian plateau to encompass 3 continents now faced potential dissolution as competing claimants emerged to challenge legitimate succession. The pretender Gaugamela, whether genuinely Bardia or an impostor as later Persian sources claimed, had seized control of key territories including Media, Parthia and Armenia, while the royal army remained distant in Egypt. His proclamation of tax relief and military service exemptions had gained popular support among populations burdened by the costs of imperial expansion, creating a genuine threat to Achaemenid authority. The crisis deepened when news of Cambyses' death reached the Persian nobility, who found themselves confronted with a ruler whose legitimacy they questioned but whose control over the empire's heartland they could not immediately contest. The administrative apparatus that Cyrus had established continued to function under Gaumata's authority, suggesting either that the pretender possessed genuine royal blood or that he had successfully co-opted key bureaucratic elements. The situation demanded immediate action from those Persian nobles who rejected his claim to the throne. Darius, son of Hystaspes and member of a collateral branch of the Achaemenid family, emerged as the primary challenger to Gaumata's rule. His genealogical connection to the royal house traced through Hystaspes, an ancestor shared with Cyrus, though this relationship placed him outside the direct line of succession. At approximately 30 years of age, Darius had already demonstrated administrative competence as satrap of Parthia and possessed the military experience necessary to challenge for supreme power. his position as spear-bearer to Cambyses had provided intimate knowledge of imperial administration and access to the network of relationships essential for political success. The conspiracy that would place Darius on the throne involved 6 other Persian nobles, each representing powerful families with extensive territorial holdings and military resources. These conspirators included Interfernes, Otanes, Gobrias, Hydans, Megabyzes, and Aspathines, men whose combined influence extended throughout the empire's core provinces. The coordination required to organize simultaneous action across such vast distances demonstrated the sophisticated communication networks that Persian aristocrats had developed to maintain their political and economic interests. The planning for Gaumata's overthrow required careful attention to timing and logistics. The pretender had established his primary residence at Sakaiavatis in Media, a fortress location that provided defensive advantages but also concentrated his supporters in a single location. Persian intelligence networks, developed during the conquests of Cyrus and Cambyses, provided detailed information about the fortress's defences, garrison strength, and the movements of key officials. The conspirators understood that success required swift action before Gaumata could consolidate his position or summon additional military support. The assault on Sakaiavatis in September 522 BCE demonstrated the tactical innovations that would characterize Darius's later military campaigns. Rather than conducting a prolonged siege, the conspirators employed deception and surprise to penetrate the fortress's defences. The small size of their force, numbering fewer than 20 men including servants and guards, allowed them to approach the fortress without arousing suspicion, while their noble status provided access to areas normally restricted to unauthorized personnel. The fighting within the fortress walls involved close-quarters combat as the conspirators battled Gaumata's guards in the narrow corridors and chambers of the royal residence. Persian weapons training, emphasizing swordsmanship and individual combat skills, proved decisive in the confined spaces where superior numbers could not be effectively deployed. The death of Gaumata and his immediate supporters eliminated the pretender's claim while providing the conspirators with physical proof of their victory to present to potential supporters throughout the empire. The immediate aftermath of Gaumata's death revealed the extent of the crisis facing the Persian Empire. Rebellions erupted simultaneously across multiple provinces as local leaders sought to exploit the perceived weakness of central authority. Babylon declared independence under Nidintubel, who claimed descent from Nebuchadnezzar II and attempted to restore Neo-Babylonian rule. Media rallied behind Phraortes, who asserted Median royal lineage and sought to re-establish the pre-Persian kingdom. Armenia, Parthia, Margiana, and Satagidia each produced their own claimants to independence, creating a coordinated challenge to Achaemenid authority. The scale of these simultaneous rebellions suggested either remarkable coincidence or careful coordination among the empire's subject peoples. The rebels' ability to mobilize military forces and establish alternative administrative structures indicated that Persian control over conquered territories remained more tenuous than the empire's rapid expansion had suggested. The crisis demonstrated that Achaemenid authority depended heavily on the personal prestige of the ruling monarch and the perceived inevitability of Persian military superiority. Darius's response to this multi-front crisis established the strategic principles that would guide Persian military operations for the remainder of his reign. Rather than attempting to suppress all rebellions simultaneously, he prioritized threats based on their potential to inspire further resistance and their strategic importance to imperial stability. The Babylonian rebellion received immediate attention due to the province's wealth and its symbolic significance as the former seat of Near Eastern imperial power. The campaign against Babylon required careful preparation, as the city's massive fortifications and extensive food supplies made it capable of withstanding prolonged siege. Darius assembled a substantial army including Persian and Median core units, supplemented by loyal contingents from provinces that had not joined the rebellion. The force's composition reflected the king's understanding that military success against Babylon would require not only tactical competence, but also the demonstration of imperial unity to discourage further defections. The siege of Babylon extended for nearly 2 years, testing both Persian persistence and the city's resolve. The defenders, led by Nidintu-Bel and later by Araka after the first pretender's capture, employed sophisticated defensive tactics, including the use of Greek fire and coordinated sorties against Persian siege works. The city's position on the Euphrates River provided access to water and potential supply routes, while its agricultural hinterland could support the population during extended resistance. Persian siege techniques during this campaign demonstrated the military innovations that Darius had introduced to overcome the challenges of urban warfare. The construction of circumvallation walls prevented supplies from reaching the city while protecting Persian forces from defender sorties. The use of siege towers and battering rams, technologies acquired through contact with Greek and Phoenician engineers, provided new capabilities for breaching fortified walls. The systematic destruction of irrigation systems in the surrounding countryside created pressure on the urban population while denying resources to the defenders. The fall of Babylon in 519 BCE marked the turning point in Darius's consolidation of imperial authority. The city's capture eliminated the most dangerous of the rebellious movements while providing substantial financial resources for continuing military operations. The harsh treatment of the city's leadership, including the execution of Nidintu-Bel and mass deportations of prominent citizens, demonstrated Darius's determination to prevent future rebellions through the application of overwhelming force. The suppression of the remaining rebellions followed a similar pattern of careful preparation, systematic siege warfare, and severe punishment of rebel leaders. The Median rebellion collapsed following the defeat and capture of Phraortes, while the Armenian resistance ended with the submission of local nobles who recognized the futility of continued opposition. The eastern provinces of Parthia, Margiana, and Satygidia required more extensive military operations due to their distance from the imperial centre and the mobility of their cavalry-based armies. The successful suppression of these widespread rebellions established Darius as the undisputed master of the Persian Empire, while revealing the administrative weaknesses that had enabled such coordinated resistance. The king's response involved fundamental reforms to the imperial governmental system, creating new institutions and procedures designed to prevent future challenges to central authority. These reforms would transform the Achaemenid Empire from a confederation of conquered territories into a unified administrative state, capable of governing diverse populations across vast distances. The establishment of the satrap system represented Darius's most significant administrative innovation, creating a hierarchical structure that balanced central control with local autonomy. The empire was divided into 20 satrapies, each governed by a satrap appointed directly by the king and responsible for maintaining order, collecting taxes, and providing military forces when required. These provincial governors possessed substantial authority within their territories, but remained subject to royal oversight through a network of inspectors and intelligence agents known as the King's Eyes and Ears. The selection of satraps reflected Darius's understanding of the political dynamics that had enabled the recent rebellions. Rather than relying exclusively on Persian nobles, the king appointed governors from various ethnic backgrounds, including loyal members of conquered peoples who had demonstrated competence and reliability. This policy created opportunities for advancement within the imperial hierarchy, while ensuring that provincial administration reflected local knowledge and cultural sensitivity. The standardization of imperial administration extended beyond provincial governance to encompass legal, monetary, and communication systems throughout the empire. The introduction of standardized weights and measures facilitated trade and tax collection while reducing opportunities for corruption and fraud. The establishment of royal mints producing gold darics and silver sigloi created a unified monetary system that supported commercial transactions across the empire's vast territories. The construction of the Royal Road represented perhaps the most ambitious infrastructure project undertaken by any ancient empire, creating a communication and transportation network that connected the imperial capital at Susa with the western provinces in Anatolia. The road stretched approximately 1,600 miles from Sardis to Susa, with way stations positioned at regular intervals to provide fresh horses and supplies for royal messengers. This system enabled the transmission of imperial orders and intelligence reports across the empire in a matter of weeks rather than months, dramatically improving the central government's ability to respond to emerging challenges. The engineering challenges involved in constructing the Royal Road required sophisticated planning and substantial financial resources. The route traversed mountain ranges, river valleys, and desert regions, each presenting unique obstacles that Persian engineers overcame through innovative construction techniques. The road's surface consisted of carefully fitted stone blocks in urban areas and compacted earth with stone foundations in rural regions, creating a durable transportation infrastructure that would serve the empire for centuries. The establishment of the postal system along the Royal Road created the world's first organised government communication network, enabling rapid transmission of information between the imperial centre and distant provinces. Royal messengers, equipped with official seals and authorization documents, could traverse the entire length of the road in 7 days, a remarkable achievement given the transportation technology available in the ancient world. This system provided the Persian king with unprecedented ability to monitor provincial administration and coordinate military operations across vast distances. The construction of Persepolis as the ceremonial capital of the empire represented Darius's vision of Persian imperial grandeur and his commitment to creating architectural monuments worthy of the world's greatest power. The site, located in the Persian heartland near Pasargadae, occupied a natural terrace that provided both defensive advantages and symbolic elevation above the surrounding landscape. The complex of palaces, audience halls, and administrative buildings created a setting for the elaborate ceremonies that reinforced the king's authority and the empire's unity. The architectural design of Persepolis incorporated elements from throughout the Persian Empire, creating a visual representation of the diversity and unity that characterized Achaemenid rule. The massive columns of the Apadana, or audience hall, drew inspiration from Egyptian and Mesopotamian precedents, while incorporating distinctly Persian decorative elements. The relief sculptures that adorned the palace walls depicted representatives from all the empire's peoples bringing tribute to the Persian king, emphasizing the universal nature of Achaemenid authority. The construction of Persepolis required the coordination of skilled craftsmen from throughout the empire, creating opportunities for cultural exchange and artistic innovation. Persian, Median, Babylonian, Egyptian, and Greek artisans worked together on the project, sharing techniques and aesthetic traditions that produced a distinctive imperial style. The administrative records preserved in the Persepolis Fortification Archive provide detailed information about the organisation of this massive construction project, including payment records, supply lists, and work schedules that reveal the sophisticated planning required for such an undertaking. The religious and administrative reforms implemented at Persepolis reflected Darius's broader vision of imperial governance, but the empire's expansion had created new challenges along its western frontiers. The Greek city-states of Ionia, incorporated into the Persian Empire following Cyrus's conquest of Lydia, had initially accepted Persian rule with relative equanimity. The satrapal system allowed these communities to maintain their traditional institutions while contributing taxes and military service to the imperial administration. However, the economic pressures of supporting Persian military campaigns and the cultural tensions between Greek democratic traditions and Persian autocratic governance created underlying instabilities that would eventually explode into open rebellion. The immediate catalyst for the Ionian Revolt emerged from the complex political dynamics within the city of Miletus, the most prosperous and influential of the Greek settlements along the Anatolian coast. Aristagoras, who served as deputy to the tyrant Histiaeus, found himself in an increasingly precarious position following the failure of his expedition against the island of Naxos in 499 BCE. The Persian satrap Artaphernus had provided substantial financial support for this campaign, expecting either successful conquest that would extend Persian control over the Cyclades or reimbursement for the expedition's costs. The defeat of the Persian-backed force left Aristagoras unable to repay his debts while facing potential punishment for the military failure. The political structure of Persian-controlled Ionia had evolved to balance imperial requirements with local traditions through a system of appointed tyrants who served as intermediaries between the Persian administration and Greek populations. These rulers, typically drawn from prominent local families, maintained domestic authority while ensuring compliance with Persian tax collection and military recruitment. The system had functioned effectively for nearly half a century, providing stability and prosperity that enabled the Ionian cities to flourish under Persian rule. However, the growing influence of democratic movements in mainland Greece had begun to challenge the legitimacy of tyrannical rule, creating internal pressures that Persian administrators struggled to address. Aristagoras' decision to foment rebellion against Persian authority represented a calculated gamble that the widespread discontent with tyrannical rule could be channeled into a coordinated resistance movement. His first action involved the dramatic gesture of renouncing his own authority and proclaiming the restoration of democratic government in Miletus. This declaration resonated throughout the Ionian cities, where similar movements quickly emerged to overthrow Persian-appointed tyrants and establish popular assemblies. The speed with which these political transformations occurred demonstrated the extent of underlying opposition to Persian rule that had previously remained hidden beneath the surface of apparent compliance. The initial success of the democratic movements in Ionia created momentum for broader resistance to Persian authority. The city of Mytilene on Lesbos captured and executed the tyrant Coes, while Erythrae and Ephesus expelled their Persian-appointed rulers and established democratic constitutions. The rebellion spread beyond the immediate coastal region to encompass Greek settlements throughout western Anatolia, creating a coordinated challenge to Persian control that threatened to inspire similar movements in other parts of the empire. The rebels' ability to act simultaneously across such a wide geographical area suggested careful planning and communication networks that Persian intelligence services had failed to detect. The military dimension of the Ionian Revolt required substantial resources and coordination that the Greek cities could not provide independently. Aristagoras understood that successful resistance to Persian power would require external support from the independent Greek states, particularly Athens and Sparta, which possessed the military capabilities necessary to challenge Persian forces. His diplomatic mission to mainland Greece, in 499 BCE, sought to convince these powers that Persian expansion threatened their own independence, and that supporting the Ionian rebels served their strategic interests. The Athenian response to Aristagoras' appeal reflected the complex political dynamics within the emerging Athenian democracy. The recent expulsion of the tyrant Hippias and the constitutional reforms of Cleisthenes had created a political system that emphasized popular participation and resistance to autocratic rule. The Athenian assembly, influenced by both democratic ideology and practical concerns about Persian expansion toward Europe, voted to provide military support to the Ionian rebels. This decision committed Athens to direct confrontation with the Persian Empire, fundamentally altering the balance of power in the eastern Mediterranean. The Athenian expeditionary force that sailed to Ionia in 498 BCE consisted of 20 triremes carrying approximately 4,000 hoplites and supporting personnel. This relatively modest force reflected both the limitations of Athenian military resources and the assembly's reluctance to commit extensively to a distant campaign. The Athenian ships were joined by 5 triremes from Eretria, creating a combined Greek fleet that provided the rebels with naval capabilities they had previously lacked. The arrival of these reinforcements transformed the rebellion from a local uprising into an international conflict that would have far-reaching consequences for both Greek and Persian civilizations. The strategic planning for the rebel campaign focused on striking at the symbols and infrastructure of Persian authority in western Anatolia. The city of Sardis, serving as the satrapal capital and the primary centre of Persian administration in the region, represented the most important target for demonstrating the rebellion's strength and attracting additional support. The city's capture would provide the rebels with substantial financial resources, while disrupting Persian communication and supply lines throughout the region. The psychological impact of seizing such an important Persian stronghold would encourage other subject peoples to join the rebellion while demonstrating to potential Greek allies that Persian power could be successfully challenged. The march on Sardis required careful coordination between the various rebel forces and their Greek allies. The combined army, numbering approximately 25,000 men including Ionian hoplites, Athenian reinforcements, and auxiliary troops from throughout the region, represented the largest Greek military force assembled since the Trojan War. The diversity of this coalition reflected both the widespread nature of the rebellion and the challenges of maintaining unity among forces with different military traditions, equipment, and tactical doctrines. The Persian satrap Artaphernes, caught off guard by the scale and coordination of the rebel advance, withdrew his forces to the citadel of Sardis while sending urgent messages to Darius requesting immediate reinforcements. The assault on Sardis in 498 BCE demonstrated both the potential and limitations of the rebel coalition. The lower city fell quickly to the combined Greek and Ionian forces, who overwhelmed the Persian garrison through superior numbers and tactical coordination. The rebels' success in penetrating the city's defences encouraged hopes that Persian authority could be permanently expelled from western Anatolia. However, the accidental fire that destroyed much of the lower city, including the Temple of Cybele, created a propaganda disaster that Persian authorities would exploit to justify harsh retribution against the rebels and their supporters. The destruction of the Temple of Cybele carried particular significance because this goddess held special importance for both Greek and Persian populations in the region. The temple's destruction, whether intentional or accidental, provided Persian propaganda with evidence of Greek impiety and disrespect for local religious traditions. Darius would later cite this sacrilege as justification for his campaigns against Greece, arguing that the Greeks had demonstrated their hostility not only to Persian authority, but to the religious beliefs of Anatolia's indigenous populations. The fire's political consequences far exceeded its immediate military impact, providing Persian diplomats with powerful arguments for rallying support against the rebellion. The Persian response to the Sardis attack revealed the military and administrative capabilities that had enabled the empire's expansion across 3 continents. Rather than attempting to suppress the rebellion through hasty military action, Darius coordinated a systematic campaign that would isolate the rebels from potential allies while gradually reducing their territorial holdings. The king's strategy involved multiple simultaneous operations designed to prevent the rebels from concentrating their forces while demonstrating Persian determination to restore imperial authority regardless of the costs involved. The Persian military build-up in western Anatolia drew upon the empire's vast human and material resources, assembling forces that dwarfed anything the rebels could field. Artaphernes the Elder, serving as satrap of Lydia, coordinated the land-based operations while Darius, Hymes, and Otanes led separate armies tasked with reducing rebel strongholds throughout the region. The Persian naval forces, commanded by Phoenician and Cypriot captains with extensive experience in Mediterranean warfare, moved to blockade the Ionian cities and prevent additional Greek reinforcements from reaching the rebels. The systematic nature of the Persian reconquest became apparent as imperial forces methodically reduced rebel positions throughout western Anatolia. The city of Clazomenae fell after a brief siege, with its population sold into slavery as punishment for joining the rebellion. Kyme and Phocaea suffered similar fates, demonstrating Persian determination to make the costs of rebellion so severe that other subject peoples would hesitate to challenge imperial authority. The speed with which these cities fell reflected both superior Persian military capabilities and the rebels' inability to provide mutual support against coordinated imperial attacks. The Athenian withdrawal from the campaign following the Sardis operation marked a crucial turning point in the rebellion's fortunes. The Athenian assembly, faced with the prospect of prolonged warfare against the Persian Empire, voted to recall their expeditionary force rather than commit additional resources to the Ionian cause. This decision reflected both practical concerns about Athens' ability to sustain distant military operations and growing awareness of the risks involved in direct confrontation with Persian power. The departure of Athenian forces deprived the rebels of their most experienced military units, while sending a clear signal that external support could not be relied upon for the rebellion's success. The naval dimension of the conflict became increasingly important as Persian forces tightened their control over the Anatolian coastline. The rebel cities' survival depended on their ability to maintain communication and supply lines across the Aegean Sea, while Persian naval forces sought to isolate them from potential allies and sources of reinforcement. The Ionian cities possessed substantial naval resources, including experienced crews and well-constructed triremes, but they faced the combined fleets of Phoenicia, Cyprus and Cilicia operating under Persian command. The resulting naval warfare would determine whether the rebellion could maintain its viability or would be gradually strangled by Persian naval superiority. The Persian siege of Miletus in 494 BCE represented the climactic engagement of the Ionian Revolt, bringing together the largest military and naval forces that had been assembled in the eastern Mediterranean up to that time. The city's position on a peninsula provided natural defensive advantages, while its substantial population and resources enabled prolonged resistance to Persian attack. The rebels understood that Miletus' survival would determine the rebellion's fate, concentrating their remaining naval forces in a desperate attempt to break the Persian blockade and maintain communication with the outside world. The Battle of Lade, fought in the waters near Miletus, involved over 600 warships and represented the largest naval engagement in Greek history to that point. The Ionian fleet, commanded by Dionysius of Phocaea, included contingents from throughout the rebel cities, each maintaining their traditional fighting methods and command structures. The Persian fleet, under Phoenician leadership, possessed superior numbers and coordination, having been organised according to imperial military doctrine that emphasised unified command and tactical flexibility. The battle's outcome would determine not only the fate of Miletus, but the future of Greek independence in western Anatolia. The Persian victory at Lade resulted from a combination of superior numbers, better coordination, and the defection of key Ionian contingents during the height of the battle. The Samian ships, comprising a significant portion of the rebel fleet, withdrew from the engagement following secret negotiations with Persian commanders. This betrayal created gaps in the Ionian battle line that Persian forces exploited to devastating effect, surrounding and destroying the remaining rebel vessels. The destruction of the Ionian fleet eliminated the rebellion's last hope of maintaining resistance against Persian land forces, sealing the fate of the remaining rebel cities. The fall of Miletus following the naval defeat marked the effective end of the Ionian revolt, though isolated resistance continued in some cities for several additional years. The Persian treatment of the captured city demonstrated the empire's determination to prevent future rebellions through the application of overwhelming force. The adult male population was executed or enslaved, while women and children were deported to settlements along the Persian Gulf. The city's destruction served as a warning to other subject peoples about the consequences of challenging Persian authority, while its strategic location was maintained through the establishment of a new settlement populated by loyal Persian colonists. The suppression of the Ionian Revolt restored Persian control over Western Anatolia, but created new challenges for imperial administration. The rebellion had demonstrated that the existing system of appointed tyrants could not guarantee loyalty among Greek populations, particularly when faced with the attractive alternative of democratic self-governance. Darius's response involved administrative reforms that granted greater autonomy to the Greek cities while maintaining Persian oversight through appointed officials and regular tribute payments. This compromise solution sought to address the underlying causes of the rebellion while preserving essential imperial interests in the region. The Persian king's decision to punish Athens and Eretria for their support of the Ionian rebels reflected both personal anger at their interference and strategic calculation about the need to deter future Greek intervention in Persian affairs. The Athenian and Eretrian military support had transformed a local rebellion into an international conflict, demonstrating that Persian expansion toward Europe would face organised resistance from the independent Greek states. Darius understood that Persian hegemony over the eastern Mediterranean required either the submission or destruction of these potential centres of opposition to imperial authority. The planning for the Persian expedition against Greece began immediately following the suppression of the Ionian Revolt, with Darius coordinating the largest military operation in the empire's history. The campaign's objectives extended beyond simple punishment of Athens and Eretria to encompass the broader goal of establishing Persian control over the Greek mainland. The king's advisors argued that Greek independence posed a permanent threat to Persian interests in Western Anatolia, as the democratic ideology and military capabilities of the Greek cities would continue to inspire resistance among the empire's subject peoples. The first Persian expedition against Greece, launched in 492 BCE under the command of Mardonius, Darius's son-in-law, represented an ambitious attempt to extend Persian power across the Aegean Sea and into Europe. The expedition's scale reflected both the empire's vast resources and the king's determination to demonstrate Persian military supremacy to potential enemies throughout the Mediterranean region. The combined land and naval forces assembled for this campaign exceeded anything previously deployed by the Persian Empire, indicating the strategic importance that Darius placed on the Greek campaign's success. The Persian fleet that accompanied Mardonius's expedition consisted of approximately 600 ships drawn from throughout the empire's maritime provinces. Phoenician vessels formed the core of this naval force, supplemented by ships from Cyprus, Cilicia, and the recently reconquered Ionian cities. The fleet's size enabled it to transport substantial military forces while maintaining control over the sea lanes connecting Asia and Europe. The Persian naval commanders possessed extensive experience in Mediterranean warfare, having participated in the suppression of the Ionian Revolt and previous campaigns against Greek settlements. The land forces under Mardonius's command included elite Persian and Median units alongside contingents from throughout the empire's western provinces. The army's composition reflected the multicultural nature of Persian military organisation, with each ethnic group contributing specialised capabilities that enhanced the expedition's overall effectiveness. Persian heavy cavalry provided shock capability against enemy formations, while Scythian horse archers offered mobility and harassment tactics. The inclusion of siege specialists and engineers indicated Persian preparation for conducting operations against fortified Greek cities. The expedition's route through Thrace and Macedonia represented the most direct approach to the Greek mainland, while avoiding the risks associated with extended sea voyages across the Aegean. The Persian strategy involved establishing secure bases along the northern Greek coast before launching coordinated attacks against Athens and Eretria. This approach would enable the expedition to maintain supply lines with Asia while positioning Persian forces to threaten multiple Greek cities simultaneously. The conquest of Thrace and Macedonia would also provide the empire with valuable resources and strategic positions for future operations in southeastern Europe. The Persian advance through Thrace encountered fierce resistance from tribal confederations that had maintained their independence despite previous Scythian and Macedonian invasions. The Thracian warriors, renowned for their ferocity and knowledge of local terrain, employed guerrilla tactics that inflicted heavy casualties on the Persian forces. The mountainous landscape of the region favoured defensive operations, allowing relatively small Thracian forces to ambush Persian columns and disrupt supply lines. The Persian response required extensive resources and time that had not been anticipated in the original campaign planning. The destruction of the Persian fleet during a storm off Mount Athos represented a catastrophic setback that effectively ended the first expedition against Greece. The violent winds and treacherous currents around the Athos Peninsula had claimed numerous vessels throughout history, but the Persian commanders had underestimated the navigational challenges posed by this notorious stretch of coastline. The loss of approximately 300 ships and their crews eliminated the expedition's naval capabilities, while stranding the land forces in hostile territory without adequate supply lines. The Persian withdrawal from Thrace following the naval disaster demonstrated both the expedition's dependence on maritime support and the challenges of conducting extended military operations at such distances from the imperial centre. The surviving Persian forces, depleted by combat losses and disease, required months to return to Asia while maintaining defensive formations against continued Thracian harassment. The expedition's failure provided Greek cities with evidence that Persian power could be successfully resisted, encouraging preparation for future conflicts while demonstrating the limitations of imperial military capabilities. Darius's response to the first expedition's failure involved comprehensive planning for a second, larger campaign that would avoid the mistakes that had doomed Mardonius's forces. The king understood that Persian prestige throughout the empire depended on successfully punishing Athens and Eretria for their interference in imperial affairs. The failure to achieve this objective would encourage other subject peoples to challenge Persian authority, potentially creating widespread instability that could threaten the empire's survival. The second expedition would need to demonstrate Persian military superiority while establishing permanent control over the Greek mainland. The second Persian expedition, launched in 490 BCE under the joint command of Artaphernes the Younger and Datis, represented a more focused and tactically sophisticated approach to the Greek campaign. Rather than attempting to conquer extensive territories in Thrace and Macedonia, this expedition would strike directly at its primary targets through amphibious operations across the Aegean Sea. The Persian fleet, rebuilt and reinforced following the previous disaster, would transport substantial military forces directly to the Greek coast, while avoiding the navigational hazards that had destroyed the first expedition. The Persian strategy for the second expedition involved the systematic reduction of Greek resistance through coordinated naval and land operations. The fleet would establish temporary bases on Greek islands, providing secure positions for resupply and reinforcement, while threatening multiple targets simultaneously. The Persian commanders understood that Greek military capabilities depended on the coordination of independent city-states, and they sought to prevent such cooperation by forcing each city to focus on its own immediate defence. The rapid capture of Eretria would demonstrate Persian capabilities while isolating Athens from potential allies. The siege of Eretria in 490 BCE revealed both the strengths and limitations of Persian military methods when applied to Greek urban warfare. The city's fortifications, constructed according to the latest Greek military engineering principles, presented formidable obstacles to direct assault. The Persian forces, numbering approximately 25,000 men including elite infantry and cavalry units, possessed superior numbers and equipment but lacked experience in conducting siege operations against Greek defensive systems. The 6-day siege required Persian commanders to adapt their tactics to overcome defensive innovations they had not previously encountered. The fall of Eretria resulted from betrayal by prominent citizens who opened the city's gates to Persian forces rather than from successful military assault. This outcome reflected the political divisions within Greek cities that Persian diplomats had learned to exploit during their campaigns in Ionia. The Persian treatment of captured Eretria followed the harsh precedent established during the suppression of the Ionian Revolt, with the population enslaved and the city destroyed as punishment for supporting the rebels. The destruction of Eretria eliminated one of the expedition's primary objectives while providing a base for operations against Athens. The Persian landing at Marathon represented the culmination of Darius's campaign to punish Athens for its interference in the Ionian Revolt. The plain of Marathon, located approximately 25 miles northeast of Athens, provided an ideal location for deploying the Persian army's cavalry and archer units, while offering access to the sea for naval support. The Persian commanders, confident in their numerical superiority and the proven effectiveness of their military system, expected to achieve a decisive victory that would force Athenian submission and establish Persian control over central Greece. The Persian defeat at Marathon in 490 BCE sent shockwaves throughout the Achaemenid Empire, marking the first time that Greek hoplites had decisively defeated a Persian army in open battle. The news of Datis and Artaphernes' failure reached Darius at Persepolis through the imperial communication network, arriving with detailed reports of the tactical innovations that had enabled Athenian victory. The Persian king's response revealed both personal humiliation and strategic understanding that the Greek campaign required fundamental reassessment of imperial military capabilities and objectives. Darius immediately began planning a third expedition against Greece, one that would dwarf the previous campaigns in scale and sophistication. The king understood that Persian prestige throughout the empire depended on demonstrating that the Marathon defeat represented merely a temporary setback rather than evidence of Greek military superiority. The vast resources of the empire would be mobilized for a campaign designed to achieve permanent conquest of the Greek mainland, establishing Persian control over southeastern Europe and eliminating the threat of future Greek interference in imperial affairs. The planning for this massive undertaking required unprecedented coordination of military, naval, and logistical resources from across the Persian Empire. Engineers began surveying potential routes for the army's advance, while naval commanders assessed the requirements for transporting and supplying forces that would exceed anything previously assembled in ancient warfare. The king's advisors estimated that successful conquest of Greece would require at least 200,000 soldiers, supported by a fleet of over 1,000 warships, creating logistical challenges that pushed the empire's administrative capabilities to their limits. The rebellion in Egypt during 486 BCE interrupted these preparations while creating additional pressure for decisive action against Greece. The Egyptian uprising, led by native priests and nobles who rejected Persian authority, threatened to inspire similar movements throughout the empire, if not suppressed quickly and decisively. The rebels had seized control of key cities including Memphis and Thebes, establishing an alternative administration that claimed legitimacy from the ancient pharaonic traditions. The timing of this rebellion, coinciding with Persian preparations for the Greek campaign, suggested either remarkable coincidence or coordinated planning between Egyptian and Greek opponents of imperial rule. Darius's death in 486 BCE, while personally leading the campaign to suppress the Egyptian rebellion, created a succession crisis that temporarily halted preparations for the Greek expedition. The king had not clearly designated his successor, creating competition between his sons Xerxes and Artabazanes for the throne. This dispute reflected broader tensions within the Persian nobility between those who favoured continued expansion and those who argued for consolidation of existing territories. The resolution of this succession crisis would determine not only the empire's leadership, but also its strategic direction for the coming decades. Xerxes, born around 519 BCE to Darius and Atossa, daughter of Cyrus the Great, possessed the strongest claim to the throne through both paternal and maternal lineage. His education had included extensive training in military command, administrative governance, and the cultural traditions that legitimized Achaemenid rule. The prince had served as satrap of Babylon, demonstrating competence in managing one of the empire's most important provinces, while gaining experience in the complex political dynamics of governing diverse populations. His supporters among the Persian nobility included many of the commanders who had participated in Darius's campaigns and understood the strategic importance of completing the conquest of Greece. The accession of Xerxes to the throne in 486 BCE was confirmed through traditional Persian ceremonies at Persepolis, where representatives from throughout the empire gathered to acknowledge the new king's authority. The elaborate rituals, conducted according to protocols established by Darius, emphasized both the continuity of Achaemenid rule and the new monarch's personal commitment to expanding Persian power. The presence of satraps, military commanders, and religious officials from across the empire demonstrated the administrative apparatus's acceptance of Xerxes' legitimacy, while providing opportunities for the new king to assess the loyalty and capabilities of his subordinates. The new king's first priority involved suppressing the Egyptian rebellion, which had grown more serious during the succession crisis. The rebels had established control over much of Upper Egypt and were receiving support from Nubian tribes along the southern frontier. Their success in maintaining resistance against Persian forces demonstrated both the challenges of governing distant provinces and the potential for coordinated opposition to imperial authority. Xerxes understood that failure to restore Persian control over Egypt would encourage similar rebellions throughout the empire, while undermining his credibility as a military leader. The Persian campaign to reconquer Egypt in 485 BCE revealed the military capabilities that Xerxes had inherited from his father, while demonstrating his personal approach to imperial governance. The expedition assembled at Memphis included elite Persian and Median units, alongside contingents from throughout the empire's western provinces. The army's composition reflected the multicultural nature of Persian military organization, with each ethnic group contributing specialized capabilities that enhanced the expedition's overall effectiveness. The inclusion of siege specialists and engineers indicated Persian preparation for conducting operations against fortified Egyptian cities that had been strengthened during the rebellion. The suppression of the Egyptian rebellion required systematic reduction of rebel strongholds throughout the Nile Valley, with Persian forces employing coordinated land and naval operations to isolate enemy positions. The rebel strategy involved defending fortified cities while conducting guerrilla operations against Persian supply lines, forcing the imperial army to maintain extensive garrisons while advancing southward. The Persian response demonstrated the logistical capabilities that had enabled the empire's expansion across 3 continents, with supply convoys moving regularly between the Mediterranean coast and the advancing army. The siege of Thebes represented the climactic engagement of the Egyptian campaign, bringing together the largest military forces that had been assembled in the Nile Valley since the Persian conquest under Cambyses. The city's position on the east bank of the Nile provided natural defensive advantages, while its substantial population and resources enabled prolonged resistance to Persian attack. The rebels understood that Thebes' survival would determine the rebellion's fate, concentrating their remaining forces in a desperate attempt to maintain Egyptian independence against overwhelming Persian superiority. The Persian victory at Thebes resulted from a combination of superior numbers, better coordination, and the systematic destruction of the city's water supply through engineering operations that diverted the Nile's flow. The rebel forces, deprived of adequate water and facing starvation, were forced to surrender after a siege lasting several months. The Persian treatment of the captured city demonstrated Xerxes' determination to prevent future rebellions through the application of overwhelming force, with the adult male population executed or enslaved, while women and children were deported to settlements throughout the empire. The restoration of Persian control over Egypt enabled Xerxes to resume preparations for the Greek campaign, while demonstrating his military capabilities to potential enemies throughout the Mediterranean region. The successful suppression of the rebellion had required coordination of substantial military resources and sophisticated logistical planning, providing valuable experience for the much larger expedition being planned against Greece. The king's advisors argued that the Egyptian campaign had proven Persian ability to conduct extended operations at great distances from the imperial centre, suggesting that similar success could be achieved against the Greek city-states. The rebellion in Babylon during 484 BCE created additional challenges for imperial administration, while testing Xerxes' ability to maintain control over the empire's most important economic centres. The Babylonian uprising, led by Bel-Shimani and later by Shamash-Sheriba, represented attempts to restore Neo-Babylonian independence through appeals to local religious traditions and cultural identity. The rebels had seized control of the city's temples and administrative buildings, establishing an alternative government that claimed legitimacy from the ancient Mesopotamian kingship traditions. The timing of this rebellion, following closely after the Egyptian uprising, suggested coordinated planning between opponents of Persian rule throughout the empire. The Persian response to the Babylonian rebellion demonstrated the military and administrative capabilities that Xerxes had developed during his service as satrap of the province. Rather than conducting a prolonged siege that would damage the city's economic infrastructure, the king employed a combination of military pressure and diplomatic negotiation to isolate the rebels from their popular support. Persian agents infiltrated the city to identify and eliminate rebel leaders, while offering amnesty to ordinary citizens who abandoned the rebellion. This approach reflected Xerxes' understanding that Babylon's wealth and strategic importance required preservation rather than destruction. The suppression of the Babylonian rebellion involved systematic reduction of rebel strongholds throughout the province, with Persian forces employing coordinated operations to prevent the rebels from consolidating their control over key cities. The Persian army assembled for this campaign included elite units from the royal guard alongside contingents from loyal provinces, creating a force capable of overwhelming rebel resistance while maintaining order in the surrounding territories. The expedition's success demonstrated Persian ability to conduct simultaneous military operations across vast distances while maintaining the administrative apparatus necessary for governing diverse populations. The harsh treatment of the Babylonian rebels reflected Xerxes' determination to prevent future challenges to Persian authority through the application of overwhelming force. The city's walls were partially demolished, its temples were stripped of their treasures, and the golden statue of Marduk was removed to prevent its use in future independence movements. The deportation of prominent Babylonian families to distant provinces eliminated potential leadership for future rebellions while demonstrating the consequences of challenging imperial authority. These measures transformed Babylon from a semi-autonomous kingdom into a directly administered Persian province, fundamentally altering the relationship between the imperial centre and one of its most important territories. The successful suppression of rebellions in Egypt and Babylon provided Xerxes with the credibility and resources necessary to resume preparations for the Greek campaign. The king's military successes had demonstrated his capability to maintain imperial unity while managing complex political and military challenges across vast distances. The wealth seized from the rebellious provinces provided substantial financial resources for the Greek expedition, while the experience gained in conducting extended military operations prepared Persian commanders for the challenges of campaigning in Europe. The scale of preparations for the Greek invasion exceeded anything previously undertaken in ancient warfare, requiring coordination of resources from across the Persian Empire and beyond. Xerxes understood that success against the Greek city-states would require not merely military victory, but also the ability to maintain control over conquered territories while preventing coalition formation among potential enemies. The expedition's objectives extended beyond simple conquest to encompass the establishment of permanent Persian control over southeastern Europe, creating a strategic position that would enable future expansion into the western Mediterranean. The engineering projects undertaken to support the Greek invasion demonstrated the Persian Empire's unprecedented organizational capabilities and technological sophistication. The construction of a canal across the Athos Peninsula represented one of the most ambitious engineering undertakings in ancient history, requiring the coordination of thousands of workers over several years. The project's objective involved creating a safe passage for the Persian fleet while avoiding the treacherous waters that had destroyed Mardonius's expedition in 492 BCE. The canal's construction required sophisticated surveying techniques, advanced excavation methods, and careful attention to drainage and water management that pushed ancient engineering capabilities to their limits. The Persian engineers who supervised the Athos Canal project drew upon expertise developed throughout the empire's territories, combining Mesopotamian hydraulic engineering with Egyptian construction techniques and Greek architectural innovations. The workforce included skilled craftsmen from major cities alongside labourers conscripted from throughout the empire's western provinces. The project's scale required establishment of temporary settlements to house the workers, supply depots to maintain equipment and materials, and administrative structures to coordinate the complex logistics involved in such an undertaking. The canal's dimensions reflected the ambitious scope of Xerxes' naval preparations, with a width sufficient to accommodate 2 triremes sailing abreast and a depth adequate for the largest vessels in the Persian fleet. The excavation removed millions of cubic meters of earth and rock, creating a waterway that shortened the voyage around the dangerous Athos Peninsula by several days while providing secure anchorage for the fleet during adverse weather conditions. The project's completion demonstrated Persian engineering capabilities while serving as a propaganda tool that emphasized the empire's ability to reshape the natural landscape to serve imperial objectives. The construction of bridges across the Hellespont represented an even more spectacular demonstration of Persian engineering prowess, creating the longest pontoon bridges in ancient history. The narrow strait separating Asia from Europe, approximately 1 mile wide at its narrowest point, had never been successfully bridged, despite its strategic importance for land-based communication between the continents. The Persian solution involved constructing 2 parallel bridges using hundreds of ships as floating supports, connected by cables and covered with wooden planking to create roadways capable of supporting the passage of massive armies. The engineering challenges involved in bridging the Hellespont required innovative solutions to problems that had never been encountered in ancient construction projects. The bridges needed to withstand the strong currents and frequent storms that characterized the strait, while supporting the weight of thousands of soldiers, cavalry units, and supply wagons crossing simultaneously. The Persian engineers employed ships of various sizes as pontoons, with larger vessels positioned at regular intervals to provide primary support while smaller boats filled the gaps between them. The entire structure was anchored to the shore through massive stone foundations and secured against lateral movement through an elaborate system of cables and anchors. The destruction of the first bridges during a violent storm demonstrated both the technical challenges involved in the project and Xerxes' determination to overcome any obstacles to the expedition's success. The king's response to this setback revealed the autocratic nature of Persian governance and the enormous resources available to the empire, Rather than abandoning the project, Xerxes ordered the immediate construction of replacement bridges using improved engineering techniques and additional materials. The Persian engineers incorporated lessons learned from the first attempt, creating stronger foundations and more flexible connections that could better withstand the strait's challenging conditions. The successful completion of the Hellespont bridges created a permanent land connection between Asia and Europe for the first time in history, enabling the Persian army to advance into Greece without dependence on naval transport. The bridge's construction required coordination of naval forces from throughout the empire, with Phoenician, Egyptian and Ionian ships providing the pontoons, while Persian engineers supervised the complex assembly process. The project's success demonstrated the empire's ability to mobilize vast resources for strategic objectives, while showcasing Persian technological capabilities to potential enemies and allies throughout the Mediterranean region. The assembly of the Persian army for the Greek invasion represented the largest military mobilization in ancient history, drawing contingents from across the empire's vast territories. The force that gathered at Sardis during the spring of 480 BCE included not only the core Persian and Median units, but also specialized troops from dozens of different peoples, each contributing unique capabilities to the expedition's overall strength. The army's composition reflected the multicultural nature of the Persian Empire, while demonstrating the administrative capabilities required to coordinate such a diverse force across thousands of miles. The Persian military organization for the Greek campaign employed the decimal system that had been refined during previous imperial expeditions, with units organized into groups of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 soldiers. This hierarchical structure facilitated both tactical coordination and administrative management, enabling commanders to maintain control over forces that exceeded anything previously assembled in ancient warfare. The system's flexibility allowed for rapid reorganization of units according to battlefield conditions, while maintaining the chain of command necessary for coordinated operations. The ethnic diversity of Xerxes' army reflected the Persian Empire's unprecedented geographical extent and cultural inclusiveness. Contingents from India brought war elephants and specialized archery techniques, while Scythian cavalry provided mobility and harassment capabilities. Ethiopian troops contributed knowledge of desert warfare, and Thracian units offered expertise in mountain fighting. The inclusion of Greek contingents from Ionia and other conquered territories demonstrated Persian ability to integrate former enemies into the imperial military system, while utilizing their specialized knowledge of Greek tactics and terrain. The logistical requirements for maintaining such a massive force during the advance through Anatolia and into Europe pushed ancient supply systems to their limits. The Persian administrative apparatus had developed sophisticated methods for coordinating food, water, equipment and medical supplies across vast distances, but the Greek expedition's scale required unprecedented planning and execution. Supply depots were established at regular intervals along the army's route, with local populations required to provide specified quantities of provisions according to their assessed capabilities. The Persian fleet assembled for the Greek campaign represented the combined naval power of the empire's maritime provinces, creating the largest naval force in ancient history. The fleet included approximately 1,200 warships drawn from Phoenicia, Egypt, Cyprus, Cilicia, and the Greek cities of Ionia, each contingent maintaining its traditional fighting methods while operating under unified Persian command. The diversity of naval traditions represented in the fleet provided tactical flexibility while creating challenges for coordination and communication during complex operations. The Persian naval commanders possessed extensive experience in Mediterranean warfare, having participated in campaigns against the Ionian rebels and other opponents of imperial authority. The fleet's organization reflected Persian understanding of naval warfare's importance for supporting land operations, while maintaining communication and supply lines across water barriers. The inclusion of specialized transport vessels enabled the fleet to carry substantial quantities of supplies and equipment, while providing amphibious capabilities for operations along the Greek coast. The advance of Xerxes' army through Anatolia toward the Hellespont created a spectacle that impressed observers throughout the ancient world. The Persian king travelled in magnificent style, accompanied by his personal guard and court officials, while maintaining the elaborate ceremonial protocols that reinforced his authority. The army's passage required careful coordination to prevent logistical breakdowns, while maintaining the discipline necessary for such a large force. Local populations along the route were required to provide hospitality and supplies according to their assessed capabilities, creating economic disruption that would influence regional politics for years to come. The crossing of the Hellespont bridges represented the symbolic and practical culmination of Persian preparations for the Greek invasion. The ceremony accompanying this historic event emphasized both the expedition's religious significance and Xerxes' personal authority over the natural world. The Persian king participated in elaborate rituals designed to ensure divine favor for the campaign, while demonstrating his power to overcome geographical obstacles that had previously separated the continents. The army's successful crossing proved the bridge's engineering soundness, while marking the beginning of the most ambitious military campaign in ancient history. The Persian advance through Thrace encountered limited resistance from local tribes who had learned to accommodate imperial authority rather than face destruction. The army's passage through this region provided opportunities for recruitment and resupply while demonstrating Persian military capabilities to potential Greek allies. The systematic organization of the advance, with specialized units assigned to specific functions, including reconnaissance, supply, and security, reflected the sophisticated planning that had characterized Persian military operations since the time of Cyrus the Great. The arrival of Xerxes' army at Thermopylae in August 480 BCE marked the beginning of the decisive phase of the Persian invasion. The narrow pass between the mountains and the sea provided the Greeks with their first opportunity to utilize terrain advantages against Persian numerical superiority. The position's strategic importance had been recognized by Greek military planners, who understood that successful defense of Thermopylae would force the Persian army to seek alternative routes into central Greece, while providing time for additional defensive preparations. The Greek force assembled at Thermopylae represented a coalition of city-states united by the common threat of Persian conquest. The Spartan contingent, led by King Leonidas, provided the expedition's core strength and military leadership, while units from Thebes, Thespiae, and other cities contributed additional manpower and local knowledge. The total Greek force numbered approximately 7,000 men, including 300 Spartan warriors whose training and equipment represented the pinnacle of Greek military development. The defenders understood that their survival depended on maximizing the advantages provided by the narrow pass, while maintaining unity among forces with different military traditions and political loyalties. The Persian defeat at Plataea in 479 BCE marked a fundamental shift in the balance of power between the Achaemenid Empire and the Greek city-states, initiating a period of gradual territorial losses that would define the remainder of the 5th century. Mardonius's death during the battle eliminated not only a capable military commander, but also one of Xerxes' most trusted advisors, creating a leadership vacuum that Persian forces in the Aegean struggled to fill. The massive quantities of gold, silver, and luxury goods captured in the Persian camp provided the Greek coalition with tangible evidence of their victory while demonstrating the wealth that had funded the invasion. More significantly, the battle's outcome convinced many Greek cities that Persian military supremacy was not inevitable, encouraging resistance movements throughout the eastern Mediterranean. The Persian retreat from mainland Greece following Plataea did not represent a complete abandonment of imperial ambitions in the region, but rather a strategic withdrawal to more defensible positions in the Aegean islands and along the Anatolian coast. Xerxes understood that maintaining Persian control over the sea lanes connecting Asia and Europe remained essential for protecting the empire's western provinces from future Greek attacks. The Persian naval bases at Samos, Chios, and other strategic locations provided platforms for projecting power throughout the Aegean while supporting Persian garrisons in Thrace and Macedonia. The king's decision to retain substantial naval forces in the region reflected his understanding that the Greek threat would persist despite the recent defeats. The Greek victory at Maccael, occurring simultaneously with Plataea, effectively ended Persian naval dominance in the eastern Aegean and triggered widespread rebellions among the Ionian cities that had been forcibly incorporated into Xerxes' invasion force. The Persian fleet, commanded by Tigranes and anchored near the Mycale promontory, had been caught off guard by the Greek naval assault led by the Spartan king Leotychidas and the Athenian general Xanthippus. The Persian commanders, aware of their crew's declining morale and the unreliability of their Ionian contingents, had beached their ships and constructed defensive positions on the shore. This tactical decision, intended to maximize their defensive advantages, instead created a trap that prevented effective retreat when the Greek assault overwhelmed their positions. The destruction of the Persian fleet at Maccael eliminated the naval capabilities that had enabled the empire to maintain control over the Aegean islands and coastal cities. The Persian ships, constructed primarily in Phoenician and Egyptian shipyards, represented years of investment in naval technology and training that could not be quickly replaced. The loss of experienced crews, many of whom had participated in previous Persian naval operations, created a knowledge gap that would hamper future Persian maritime activities. The psychological impact of the defeat spread rapidly throughout the empire's maritime provinces, encouraging local populations to question Persian military invincibility and consider alternatives to imperial rule. The immediate aftermath of Mycale witnessed the spontaneous rebellion of numerous Ionian cities that had been forced to contribute ships and crews to Xerxes' invasion force. Samos, Chios, and Lesbos declared their independence from Persian authority and expelled the Persian garrisons that had been stationed in their territories since the suppression of the Ionian Revolt. The speed with which these rebellions erupted demonstrated the extent of underlying discontent with Persian rule that had been suppressed through military force rather than genuine accommodation. The rebels' coordination suggested that secret communications had been maintained between the cities despite Persian surveillance efforts. The formation of the Delian League in 478 BCE represented the Greek response to continued Persian threats, while creating an institutional framework for coordinating anti-Persian activities throughout the Aegean. The League's establishment at Delos, with its sacred associations and central location, provided symbolic legitimacy for Greek resistance while offering practical advantages for coordinating naval operations. The Athenian leadership of the League reflected both their naval capabilities and their willingness to assume the financial and military burdens of continued warfare against the Persian Empire. The League's initial membership included most of the Aegean islands and many coastal cities in Anatolia, creating a coalition that could challenge Persian control over the eastern Mediterranean. The Persian response to the Delian League's formation revealed the empire's declining ability to project power effectively in the Aegean region. Artabazus, appointed as satrap of Hellespontine Phrygia, assembled the remaining Persian forces in western Anatolia for a campaign designed to recapture the rebellious cities and restore imperial authority. The Persian army, substantially reduced from its pre-invasion strength, included core Persian and Median units alongside contingents from loyal provinces in central Anatolia. The force's composition reflected the empire's continuing military capabilities, while highlighting the limitations imposed by recent defeats and the need to maintain substantial garrisons throughout the empire's other territories. The siege of Sestos during the winter of 479-478 BCE demonstrated both Persian determination to maintain their European foothold and the practical difficulties of conducting extended military operations with reduced resources. The city's strategic position on the European side of the Hellespont made it essential for Persian communication with their remaining territories in Thrace and Macedonia. The Persian garrison, commanded by Artaxerxes, had been reinforced with additional troops and supplies in preparation for a prolonged siege. The city's fortifications, strengthened during the Persian occupation, provided defensive advantages that enabled the garrison to resist Greek attacks for several months. The fall of Sestos to the Athenian general Xanthippus marked the effective end of Persian control over the European side of the Hellespont, eliminating the empire's primary base for operations in southeastern Europe. The siege's duration, lasting through the harsh winter months, demonstrated Greek determination to complete the expulsion of Persian forces from European territories. The capture of Artaxerxes and his execution by the Greeks sent a clear message about the consequences of continued Persian resistance, while providing the Athenians with valuable intelligence about Persian defensive preparations throughout the region. The Persian evacuation of their remaining European territories during 478 BCE represented a strategic withdrawal to more defensible positions rather than a complete abandonment of imperial ambitions in the region. The Persian commanders understood that maintaining scattered garrisons in hostile territory without adequate naval support would result in their gradual elimination through Greek attacks. The concentration of Persian forces in western Anatolia provided better opportunities for coordinated defence, while maintaining the possibility of future offensive operations when circumstances permitted. The withdrawal also freed substantial military resources for deployment in other parts of the empire where Persian authority faced challenges. The Athenian capture of Byzantium in 478 BCE eliminated the last major Persian stronghold controlling access to the Black Sea, effectively ending Persian influence over the vital grain trade routes that connected the Greek cities with the agricultural regions of southern Russia. The city's strategic position at the entrance to the Bosphorus had made it essential for Persian control over maritime commerce in the region. The Persian garrison, commanded by Megabaetus, had been reinforced with additional troops and naval vessels in recognition of the city's importance. The siege required careful coordination between Athenian land and naval forces to prevent Persian reinforcements from reaching the defenders. The systematic reduction of Persian positions along the Anatolian coast during 476 BCE demonstrated the Delian League's growing confidence and military capabilities. The Greek forces, led by the Athenian general Cimon, employed coordinated land and naval operations to capture fortified cities that had served as Persian bases for controlling the eastern Aegean. The capture of Eion on the Strymon River eliminated a major Persian stronghold in northern Greece, while providing the Athenians with access to the region's gold and silver mines. The Persian garrison's resistance, lasting several months, demonstrated their continuing military capabilities while highlighting the challenges of maintaining isolated positions against determined Greek attacks. The Persian defeat at the Battle of the Eurymedon River in 469 BCE represented the most significant military setback for the empire since the disasters at Plataea and Mycale. The Persian forces, commanded by Tithraustes and Pherendates, had assembled a substantial army and fleet in Pamphylia with the objective of re-establishing Persian control over the southern Anatolian coast. The Persian strategy involved coordinating land and naval operations to recapture the Greek cities that had joined the Delian League, while demonstrating Persian military recovery to potential allies throughout the region. The army included elite Persian and Median units alongside contingents from Cyprus, Cilicia, and other loyal provinces. The double defeat at Eurymedon, with Greek forces under Cimon destroying both the Persian fleet and army in a single day, eliminated the empire's last major attempt to regain control over the Aegean region through military force. The Persian naval commanders, recognizing their tactical disadvantages against Greek triremes, had attempted to avoid battle by beaching their ships and constructing defensive positions on the shore. This decision, similar to the strategy employed at Mycale, proved equally disastrous when Greek forces launched coordinated attacks against both the beach fleet and the Persian army positioned nearby. The destruction of approximately 200 Persian ships and the capture of their crews represented a catastrophic loss of naval capabilities that the empire could not easily replace. The Persian response to the Eurymedon disaster involved a fundamental reassessment of imperial strategy in the western regions, with increasing emphasis on diplomatic rather than military solutions to the Greek challenge. Xerxes I, who had ascended to the throne following his father Xerxes' assassination in 465 BCE, inherited an empire facing multiple challenges that required careful prioritization of resources and attention. The new king's advisors argued that continued military confrontation with the Delian League would drain resources needed for addressing internal rebellions and external threats along the empire's other frontiers. The Persian court began exploring diplomatic alternatives that might achieve imperial objectives without the enormous costs of renewed warfare. The Egyptian rebellion led by Inaros in 460 BCE created a more immediate threat to Persian interests than the ongoing Greek resistance in the Aegean. The rebel leader, claiming descent from the pharaonic dynasties, had succeeded in expelling Persian forces from much of the Nile Delta, while establishing an independent government at Memphis. The rebellion's success encouraged similar movements throughout the empire's African territories, creating the possibility of a coordinated challenge to Persian authority across multiple continents. The Persian response required substantial military resources that might otherwise have been deployed against the Greeks, forcing difficult strategic choices about resource allocation. The Athenian decision to support the Egyptian rebellion represented a dramatic expansion of their anti-Persian activities, extending Greek military involvement from the Aegean region to the African continent. The Athenian expeditionary force, numbering approximately 200 triremes with their crews and marines, provided Inaros with naval capabilities that enabled rebel control over the Nile Delta's waterways. The Greek intervention transformed a local Egyptian uprising into an international conflict that threatened Persian control over one of the empire's wealthiest provinces. The Persian commanders in Egypt, caught between rebel forces and Greek naval power, found themselves unable to maintain effective resistance without substantial reinforcements from other parts of the empire. The Persian counteroffensive in Egypt, led by Megabyzus with an army drawn from throughout the empire's western provinces, demonstrated the continuing military capabilities that enabled the Achaemenids to maintain control over their vast territories. The Persian strategy involved systematic reduction of rebel strongholds while preventing Greek naval forces from providing effective support to the Egyptian rebels. The campaign required careful coordination of land and naval operations, with Persian forces advancing along the Nile while Phoenician ships moved to blockade the delta's waterways. The Persian commanders understood that success in Egypt would require not only military victory, but also the restoration of administrative systems capable of preventing future rebellions. The siege of Memphis during 456-455 BCE represented the climactic engagement of the Egyptian rebellion, bringing together the largest military forces that had been assembled in the Nile Valley since the original Persian conquest under Cambyses. The city's position on the west bank of the Nile provided natural defensive advantages, while its substantial population and resources enabled prolonged resistance to Persian attack. The rebels and their Greek allies understood that Memphis's survival would determine the rebellion's fate, concentrating their remaining forces in a desperate attempt to maintain Egyptian independence against overwhelming Persian numerical superiority. The Persian victory at Memphis resulted from a combination of superior numbers, better coordination, and the systematic isolation of the city through engineering operations that diverted the Nile's flow. The Persian engineers, drawing upon expertise developed throughout the empire's territories, constructed elaborate dam and canal systems that reduced the water level around the city, while creating alternative channels that enabled Persian forces to approach previously inaccessible areas. The rebel forces, deprived of their naval advantages and facing starvation, were forced to surrender after a siege lasting over a year. The destruction of the Athenian expeditionary force eliminated Greek naval power in the eastern Mediterranean, while demonstrating Persian ability to achieve decisive victories when adequate resources were committed to specific objectives. The successful suppression of the Egyptian rebellion provided Artaxerxes with the credibility and resources necessary to address the ongoing Greek challenge through diplomatic rather than military means. The king's advisors argued that the enormous costs of the Egyptian campaign demonstrated the impracticality of maintaining simultaneous military operations against multiple enemies across vast distances. The Persian court began developing diplomatic initiatives designed to achieve imperial objectives in the Aegean, while avoiding the enormous expenses and risks associated with renewed warfare against the Delian League. The Persian diplomatic approach to the Greek problem involved exploiting the growing tensions between Athens and Sparta that had emerged during the period of cooperation against the Persian threat. Persian intelligence networks, developed during decades of involvement in Greek affairs, provided detailed information about the political dynamics within the Greek city-states and the personal ambitions of their leaders. The Persian strategy involved providing financial support to Sparta and other opponents of Athenian hegemony, while avoiding direct military confrontation that might reunite the Greeks against the common Persian threat. The negotiations leading to the Peace of Callias around 449 BCE represented a pragmatic accommodation between Persian and Athenian interests that recognized the military and political realities created by decades of warfare. The agreement's specific terms remain disputed among ancient sources, but the general framework involved Persian recognition of Greek independence in the Aegean islands and coastal cities in exchange for Athenian acceptance of Persian control over the Anatolian interior. The treaty established geographical boundaries that reflected the actual balance of power in the region, while providing both sides with opportunities to redirect their resources toward other priorities. The Persian acceptance of territorial losses in the Aegean reflected Artaxerxes' understanding that the empire's vast extent created vulnerabilities that could not be defended simultaneously against determined opponents. The king's advisors argued that maintaining Persian control over the Anatolian interior and the crucial trade routes connecting Asia and Europe was more important than recovering the Aegean islands that had limited strategic value. The peace agreement enabled the empire to concentrate resources on addressing internal challenges and external threats along other frontiers, while maintaining the possibility of future expansion when circumstances permitted. The assassination of Xerxes in 465 BCE had created a succession crisis that revealed the growing instability within the Persian court and the ambitious schemes of powerful nobles seeking to advance their own interests. The conspiracy, led by Artabanus, the commander of the royal guard, and involving the eunuch Aspamitres, had succeeded in eliminating the king while attempting to manipulate the succession process to place a more compliant ruler on the throne. The plotters' initial success in concealing their involvement while accusing Crown Prince Darius of patricide demonstrated the sophisticated nature of court intrigue that had developed within the Persian nobility. The emergence of Artaxerxes then as the legitimate successor following the elimination of the conspirators marked the beginning of a reign characterized by internal challenges and external pressures that would test the empire's stability. The new king, approximately 20 years old at his accession, had received traditional Persian education in military command and administrative governance, but he lacked the extensive experience that had prepared his predecessors for the complexities of imperial rule. The young monarch's survival of the succession crisis demonstrated both personal capability and the loyalty of key military commanders who recognized the dangers of continued instability. The brief usurpation attempt by Hystaspes Artaxerxes' uncle and satrap of Bactria, represented the most serious challenge to the new king's authority during the early years of his reign. The rebel's claim to the throne, based on his seniority within the Achaemenid family, attracted support from Persian nobles who questioned Artaxerxes' legitimacy and capability. The rebellion's geographic base in the eastern provinces created logistical challenges for the royal forces, while providing Hystaspes with access to the experienced cavalry units that formed the backbone of Persian military power in Central Asia. The conflict's resolution required careful coordination of military operations across thousands of miles, while maintaining the loyalty of other provincial governors who might have been tempted to support the rebel cause. The successful suppression of Hystaspes' rebellion demonstrated Artaxerxes' growing competence as a military commander, while revealing the continuing loyalty of key Persian nobles to the principle of legitimate succession. The king's personal leadership of the campaign against his uncle provided opportunities to assess the capabilities and reliability of his military commanders while demonstrating his commitment to maintaining imperial unity. The rebellion's defeat eliminated the most serious internal threat to Artaxerxes' authority, while providing valuable experience in coordinating complex military operations across the empire's vast territories. The emergence of Cambyses as a powerful figure within the Persian court, following his successful campaign in Egypt, created new dynamics within the imperial administration that would influence policy decisions for the remainder of Artaxerxes' reign. The general's military achievements had earned him substantial wealth and influence, while his marriage to Artaxerxes' sister Anytis provided family connections that enhanced his political position. The Persian nobility's recognition of Cambyses' capabilities created opportunities for advancement, while generating tensions with other court officials who viewed his growing influence as a threat to their own positions. The rebellion of Cambyses in 449 BCE represented the most serious challenge to royal authority from within the Persian establishment, demonstrating the potential for successful military commanders to translate their achievements into political power. The general's grievances against Artaxerxes involved both personal slights and policy disagreements that reflected broader tensions within the imperial administration. The rebellion's initial success in gaining control over Syria and other western provinces demonstrated the general's continuing military capabilities while revealing the challenges of maintaining loyalty among powerful nobles who possessed independent sources of strength. The negotiated resolution of Cambyses' rebellion through the mediation of Queen Mother Anytis demonstrated the importance of family relationships and personal diplomacy in maintaining imperial stability. The agreement that restored the general to royal favour while granting him substantial autonomy in his provincial command reflected Artaxerxes' understanding that the empire's vast extent required accommodation of powerful local interests. The settlement's success in preventing further rebellions by other military commanders established precedents for managing similar challenges while maintaining the essential unity of imperial authority. The growing autonomy of provincial governors during Artaxerxes' reign reflected both the practical necessities of governing vast territories and the declining effectiveness of central control mechanisms. The satrap system, originally designed to balance local autonomy with imperial oversight, had evolved to grant increasing independence to provincial administrators who possessed the military and financial resources necessary for maintaining order in their territories. The Persian court's acceptance of this evolution demonstrated pragmatic recognition that direct control over distant provinces was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain with the communication and transportation technologies available in the ancient world. The economic challenges facing the Persian Empire during the mid-5th century BCE resulted from the enormous costs of maintaining military forces across multiple continents, while supporting the elaborate court ceremonies and construction projects that reinforced imperial prestige. The empire's tax collection systems, based on assessments established during the reigns of Darius and Xerxes, had become increasingly inadequate for meeting the growing expenses of imperial administration. The Persian response involved raising tax rates and imposing additional levies that created economic hardship throughout the empire, while generating resentment among populations that had previously accepted Persian rule with relative equanimity. The Persian decision to support Sparta against Athens during the Peloponnesian War represented a strategic opportunity to weaken the empire's primary Greek opponent while avoiding direct military confrontation. The Persian court's analysis of Greek political dynamics suggested that Athenian defeat would eliminate the most serious threat to Persian interests in the Aegean, while creating opportunities for recovering territories lost during the previous decades. The financial support provided to Sparta and other opponents of Athenian hegemony represented a cost-effective alternative to renewed warfare that might have produced uncertain results at enormous expense. The Persian diplomatic and financial intervention in the Peloponnesian War demonstrated the empire's continuing influence over Greek affairs despite the territorial losses suffered during the previous decades. The Persian gold that funded Spartan naval construction and mercenary recruitment proved decisive in enabling Sparta to challenge Athenian naval supremacy while maintaining the land-based military capabilities that had made them the dominant power in the Peloponnese. The Persian strategy of supporting both sides at different times reflected sophisticated understanding of Greek political dynamics and the empire's own strategic interests in maintaining regional instability that prevented the emergence of a unified Greek threat. The death of Artaxerxes in 424 BCE initiated a succession crisis that would fundamentally alter the character of Persian imperial governance, marking the beginning of an era when provincial governors wielded unprecedented autonomy and the central authority of the Persian king faced constant challenges from within the empire's own administrative apparatus. The aging monarch's final years had been marked by increasing reliance on court officials and provincial satraps to maintain order across the vast territories, creating a power structure that enabled ambitious nobles to accumulate resources and military forces that rivaled those of the royal household itself. The empire that Darius had consolidated through systematic administrative reforms and military conquest had evolved into a loose confederation of semi-autonomous provinces, held together more by tradition and mutual interest than by effective central control. The brief reign of Xerxes II, lasting only 45 days before his assassination by his half-brother Sogdianus, demonstrated the extent to which court intrigue and familial violence had corrupted the Achaemenid succession system. The murdered king had barely begun to assert his authority when palace conspirators, led by his own relatives, eliminated him in a coup that revealed the Persian nobility's willingness to employ extreme measures in pursuit of political power. Sogdianus' own reign, lasting less than 7 months before his defeat and execution by another half-brother, Ochus, illustrated the instability that plagued the empire's leadership during this critical period. The rapid succession of rulers created uncertainty throughout the provincial administration, while encouraging local strongmen to pursue independent policies that served their own interests rather than imperial objectives. The accession of Darius II Ochus in 423 BCE brought temporary stability to the Persian throne, but the new king inherited an empire where the balance of power had shifted decisively toward the provincial governors who controlled the military and financial resources necessary for effective governance. The satrap system, originally designed to ensure central control over distant territories, had evolved into a mechanism that enabled ambitious nobles to establish personal power bases that operated with minimal oversight from the royal court. The Persian king's authority increasingly depended on his ability to maintain complex networks of personal relationships and financial incentives rather than on the institutional mechanisms that had sustained earlier Achaemenid rulers. The reign of Darius II witnessed the emergence of powerful satraps who governed their provinces as virtual independent kingdoms while maintaining nominal allegiance to the Persian crown. Tissaphernes, appointed as satrap of Lydia and later granted authority over much of western Anatolia, accumulated wealth and military forces that enabled him to conduct independent diplomatic negotiations with Greek city-states and other external powers. His control over the crucial trade routes connecting Asia and Europe provided him with revenues that rivaled those of the royal treasury, while his command of substantial military forces made him indispensable to the Persian king's efforts to maintain imperial unity. The satrap's palace at Sardis became a centre of power that attracted ambassadors and petitioners from throughout the eastern Mediterranean, demonstrating the extent to which provincial governors had assumed roles traditionally reserved for the royal court. Pharnabazus, governing the satrapy of Hellespontine Phrygia from his stronghold at Ascilium, similarly developed an autonomous power base that enabled him to pursue policies that served his personal interests while maintaining the appearance of loyalty to the Persian crown. His control over the strategic Hellespont crossing provided him with leverage over both Persian and Greek political developments, while his extensive network of agents and allies throughout the region enabled him to influence events far beyond the boundaries of his official jurisdiction. The satrap's ability to maintain substantial naval forces and conduct independent military operations demonstrated the extent to which the Persian Empire had become a confederation of powerful nobles rather than a unified state under central authority. The Persian intervention in the Peloponnesian War revealed both the empire's continuing influence over Greek affairs and the decentralized nature of imperial decision-making that characterized this period. Rather than pursuing a coordinated strategy directed from the royal court, Persian involvement in the conflict reflected the independent initiatives of individual satraps who sought to advance their own interests while claiming to serve imperial objectives. Tissaphernes and Pharnabazus competed with each other for influence over Spartan policy, each providing financial support and military assistance to different Greek factions while pursuing personal agendas that often conflicted with broader Persian strategic interests. Their rivalry demonstrated the extent to which the empire's foreign policy had become fragmented among competing centres of power. The financial resources that enabled Persian satraps to maintain their independence derived from the empire's continued prosperity, despite the political instability that plagued the central government. The extensive trade networks that connected India with the Mediterranean continued to generate substantial revenues through customs duties and taxation, while the agricultural productivity of provinces like Egypt and Mesopotamia provided the surplus wealth necessary to support large military establishments. The Persian system of taxation, based on assessments of provincial resources and capabilities, had evolved to grant significant autonomy to local administrators who collected revenues according to their own methods while remitting agreed-upon amounts to the royal treasury. This arrangement enabled successful satraps to accumulate personal wealth while fulfilling their obligations to the central government. The military organisation of the Persian Empire during this period reflected the decentralised political structure that had emerged following the succession crises of the 420 SBCE. The traditional Persian army, composed of elite units drawn from the Iranian plateau and organised according to the decimal system established by Darius I, had been supplemented by provincial forces that owed their primary loyalty to local commanders rather than to the Persian king. Satraps maintained personal armies composed of professional soldiers recruited from various ethnic groups within their territories, creating military forces that combined Persian tactical methods with local fighting traditions and equipment. These provincial armies possessed the training and equipment necessary to maintain order within their territories while providing their commanders with the military capabilities needed to pursue independent political objectives. The increasing reliance on mercenary forces represented another significant development in Persian military organisation during this period. The empire's involvement in Greek affairs had demonstrated the effectiveness of professional soldiers who fought for financial compensation rather than ethnic or political loyalty. Persian commanders began recruiting mercenaries from throughout the Mediterranean world, creating military units that possessed superior training and equipment compared to traditional levy forces while maintaining no political allegiances that might conflict with their employers' objectives. Greek hoplites, Thracian peltasts, and other specialized troops provided Persian satraps with tactical capabilities that enabled them to compete effectively with traditional Persian military units while maintaining independence from the central government's control. The Persian support for Sparta during the final phases of the Peloponnesian War demonstrated the empire's ability to influence Greek political developments through financial intervention rather than direct military action. The Persian gold that funded Spartan naval construction and mercenary recruitment proved decisive in enabling Sparta to challenge Athenian naval supremacy while maintaining the land-based military capabilities that had made them the dominant power in the Peloponnese. The Persian strategy of providing financial support to Athens' enemies represented a cost-effective method of weakening the empire's primary Greek opponent while avoiding the enormous expenses and risks associated with renewed warfare against the Delian League. The Battle of Aegospotami in 405 BCE, which effectively ended Athenian naval power and determined the outcome of the Peloponnesian War, represented the culmination of Persian diplomatic and financial intervention in Greek affairs. The Spartan victory, achieved through superior tactical coordination and the defection of key Athenian allies, eliminated the empire's most dangerous Greek opponent while demonstrating the effectiveness of Persian indirect influence over Mediterranean political developments. The destruction of the Athenian fleet and the subsequent surrender of Athens created new opportunities for Persian expansion into the Aegean region, while eliminating the military threat that had constrained imperial policy for over half a century. The Persian recovery of control over the Ionian cities following Athens' defeat represented a significant strategic victory that restored imperial authority over territories that had been lost during the previous decades of warfare. The Greek cities of Western Anatolia, deprived of Athenian protection and facing the prospect of Spartan domination, found Persian rule preferable to subjugation by their Greek neighbours. The Persian administrators who re-established imperial control over these cities employed more flexible policies than their predecessors, granting substantial autonomy to local governments while requiring tribute payments and military service when needed. This approach reflected lessons learned from previous rebellions and the empire's growing understanding of the political dynamics that influenced Greek city-state behaviour. The Spartan expedition of Agesilaus into Anatolia during 396-395 BCE represented the most serious external military threat faced by the Persian Empire since the conclusion of the Peloponnesian War. The Spartan king's invasion, supported by substantial military forces and encouraged by rebellious Greek cities along the Anatolian coast, threatened to reverse the territorial gains that Persia had achieved following Athens' defeat. The Persian response revealed both the empire's continuing military capabilities and the challenges of coordinating defensive operations across vast distances with a decentralized command structure that had evolved during the previous decades. Tissaphernes's initial attempts to contain the Spartan invasion through conventional military operations proved unsuccessful, demonstrating the tactical advantages that Greek hoplite formations possessed over traditional Persian infantry units in direct combat. The Persian satraps' forces, composed primarily of cavalry and light infantry supported by Greek mercenaries, lacked the heavy infantry capabilities necessary to engage Spartan phalanx formations in pitched battle. The Persian defeats at Sardis and other engagements revealed the limitations of the military reforms that had been implemented during the previous decades, while highlighting the continuing superiority of Greek tactical methods in certain types of warfare. The Persian decision to employ diplomatic rather than military methods to counter the Spartan threat represented a strategic innovation that would become characteristic of imperial policy during the 4th century BCE. Rather than committing additional military resources to direct confrontation with Agesilaus' forces, Persian administrators began providing financial support to Sparta's enemies in mainland Greece, encouraging the formation of anti-Spartan coalitions that would force the recall of the expeditionary army. The Persian gold that funded Athenian naval reconstruction and Theban military preparations proved more effective than military resistance in eliminating the Spartan threat, while demonstrating the empire's sophisticated understanding of Greek political dynamics. The outbreak of the Corinthian War in 395 BCE represented the successful implementation of Persian diplomatic strategy, creating a conflict in mainland Greece that forced Sparta to recall Agesilaus and his army from Anatolia to defend their homeland against a coalition of former allies. The Persian financial support that enabled Athens to rebuild its fleet and resume naval operations in the Aegean demonstrated the empire's continuing influence over Greek affairs despite the territorial losses suffered during the previous century. The war's duration, lasting nearly a decade, provided Persian administrators with opportunities to consolidate their control over the Anatolian territories while preventing the emergence of a unified Greek threat to imperial interests. The Persian naval victory at Cnidus in 394 BCE, achieved through the combined efforts of the Persian fleet under Conon and Pharnabazus, represented the most significant imperial military success since the suppression of the Egyptian rebellion decades earlier. The destruction of the Spartan fleet eliminated the naval capabilities that had enabled Sparta to project power throughout the Aegean, while demonstrating Persian ability to coordinate complex military operations involving multiple commanders and diverse forces. The victory's psychological impact extended far beyond its immediate military consequences, convincing Greek cities throughout the region that Persian power remained formidable despite the setbacks of the previous century. The reconstruction of the long walls connecting Athens to the Piraeus, funded by Persian gold and supervised by Conon, symbolized the empire's successful manipulation of Greek political dynamics to serve imperial interests. The restoration of Athenian defensive capabilities created a counterbalance to Spartan power, while ensuring that neither Greek city-state could achieve hegemony over the region. The Persian strategy of supporting different Greek factions at different times reflected sophisticated understanding of balance of power politics that enabled the empire to maintain influence over regional developments without committing substantial military resources to direct intervention. The emergence of Cyrus the Younger as a powerful figure within the Persian court during the final years of Darius II's reign represented a new development in the empire's internal political dynamics. The king's younger son, appointed as satrap of Lydia and granted authority over much of western Anatolia, accumulated wealth and military forces that enabled him to pursue policies that served his personal ambitions while maintaining the appearance of loyalty to the royal administration. His control over the crucial trade routes connecting Asia and Europe provided him with revenues that enabled him to recruit substantial mercenary forces while establishing diplomatic relationships with Greek city-states and other external powers. The Persian court's decision to grant Cyrus such extensive authority reflected both the practical necessities of governing distant territories and the king's confidence in his son's loyalty and capability. The young prince's education had included extensive training in military command and administrative governance, while his personal relationships with Greek leaders and his understanding of Mediterranean political dynamics made him valuable for managing the empire's western territories. The appointment represented a calculated risk that would enable more effective governance of the troubled western provinces, while providing the prince with opportunities to demonstrate his fitness for eventual succession to the throne. The death of Darius II in 404 BCE created the succession crisis that would trigger the most serious internal conflict in Persian history since the rebellions that had followed Cambyses' death over a century earlier. The aging king's final illness had provided opportunities for court factions to position themselves for the succession struggle, with supporters of the crown prince Artaxerxes competing against those who favoured Cyrus the Younger's claims to the throne. The Persian abilities division reflected broader tensions within the empire between those who supported centralised authority and those who favoured the decentralised system that had evolved during the previous decades. The accession of Artaxerxes II to the throne, despite his younger brother's superior military resources and territorial control, demonstrated the continuing importance of legitimacy and court support in Persian succession politics. The new king's position as the designated heir, combined with his control over the royal treasury and the loyalty of key court officials, provided him with advantages that outweighed Cyrus's military capabilities and provincial power base. The Persian nobility's initial acceptance of Artaxerxes' succession reflected their understanding of the dangers that civil war would pose to imperial stability, while hoping that the brothers might reach an accommodation that would preserve the empire's unity. Cyrus the Younger's initial acceptance of his brother's succession, demonstrated through his participation in the coronation ceremonies at Pasargadae, concealed his true intentions while providing time to complete preparations for the rebellion that would challenge Artaxerxes' authority. The prince's ability to maintain the appearance of loyalty, while secretly recruiting mercenary forces and establishing alliances with potential supporters, demonstrated the sophisticated political skills that had enabled him to accumulate power during his father's reign. His control over the western satrapies provided him with the financial resources necessary to fund a major military campaign, while his relationships with Greek commanders gave him access to the professional soldiers who would form the core of his army. The recruitment of the 10,000 Greek mercenaries represented Cyrus's most significant military innovation, creating a professional force that combined superior tactical capabilities with loyalty based on financial compensation rather than ethnic or political allegiances. The Greek soldiers, primarily veterans of the Peloponnesian War, possessed extensive combat experience and training in the hoplite tactics that had proven superior to traditional Persian infantry methods. Their willingness to serve under Persian command in exchange for generous pay and the promise of substantial bonuses demonstrated the extent to which warfare had become professionalized during the previous decades, while highlighting the empire's growing dependence on mercenary forces. The march of Cyrus's army from Sardis toward the Persian heartland during 401 BCE represented the most serious military challenge to royal authority since the empire's foundation, combining the resources of rebellious satraps with the tactical superiority of Greek professional soldiers. The expedition's composition, including Persian and other Asian troops alongside the Greek mercenaries, created a diverse force that possessed both the numerical strength necessary for major operations and the tactical flexibility needed to adapt to different battlefield conditions. The army's successful advance through Anatolia and into Mesopotamia demonstrated Cyrus's organizational capabilities while revealing the extent to which the empire's internal security had deteriorated during the previous decades. The Battle of Cunaxa in 401 BCE had ended with Cyrus the Younger's death and the scattering of his rebellion, but the victory came at an enormous cost to the Persian Empire's internal stability and external reputation. Artaxerxes II's triumph over his brother had required the mobilization of vast military resources from across the empire, depleting the royal treasury and exposing the fundamental weaknesses in the imperial administrative system. The Greek mercenaries' successful retreat to the Black Sea, immortalized in Xenophon's Anabasis, demonstrated to the Mediterranean world that Persian military power could be challenged by relatively small but well-organized forces. The empire that had once struck fear into the hearts of its enemies now appeared vulnerable to internal rebellion and external aggression, encouraging ambitious satraps and foreign powers to test the limits of royal authority. The reign of Artaxerxes II stretched for nearly half a century, from 404 to 359 BCE, becoming the longest in Achaemenid history, but also marking a period of gradual decline that would ultimately prove irreversible. The king's initial years were consumed by the aftermath of his brother's rebellion and the complex task of restoring central authority over provinces that had grown accustomed to operating with minimal oversight from the royal court. The satraps who had supported Cyrus required careful handling to prevent further rebellions, while those who had remained loyal demanded rewards that strained the imperial finances. The delicate balance between punishment and accommodation that characterized Artaxerxes' approach to these challenges revealed both his political acumen and the constraints that limited his options for decisive action. The satraps' revolt that erupted during the 370s and 360s BCE represented the most serious internal threat to Persian unity since the rebellions that had followed Darius' accession 2 centuries earlier. The rebellion began in western Anatolia, where Ariobarzanes, satrap of Hellespontine Phrygia, declared his independence from royal authority and began recruiting mercenary forces to defend his territory against imperial armies. His example quickly spread to other provinces, with Datames of Cappadocia, Mausolus of Caria, and Orontes of Armenia joining the revolt and coordinating their resistance efforts. The rebels' ability to maintain their independence for over a decade demonstrated the extent to which the empire's military capabilities had deteriorated, while revealing the inadequacy of the administrative systems that were supposed to ensure provincial loyalty. The rebellious satraps possessed several advantages that enabled them to challenge royal authority effectively. Their control over wealthy provinces provided them with the financial resources necessary to recruit substantial mercenary armies, while their knowledge of local terrain and political dynamics gave them strategic advantages over forces sent from the Persian heartland. The rebels had also learned from Cyrus the Younger's example, employing Greek military advisors and adopting tactical innovations that enhanced their forces' effectiveness against traditional Persian units. Their coordination through secret communications and mutual support agreements created a network of resistance that proved difficult for royal forces to suppress through conventional military operations. Artaxerxes II's response to the satraps' revolt revealed both the empire's continuing military capabilities and the limitations imposed by financial constraints and political considerations. The king assembled substantial armies from loyal provinces, including elite Persian and Median units, alongside contingents from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and other regions that remained under direct royal control. However, the enormous costs of maintaining these forces in the field while conducting simultaneous operations across multiple theatres strained the imperial treasury and forced difficult choices about resource allocation. The Persian commanders also faced the challenge of operating in hostile territory where local populations often supported the rebels, creating logistical difficulties that hampered their effectiveness. The revolt's eventual suppression resulted more from the rebels' internal divisions and the empire's diplomatic efforts than from decisive military victories. Persian agents succeeded in exploiting personal rivalries among the rebel leaders, encouraging defections and preventing the coordination that had initially made their resistance effective. The promise of pardons and the restoration of their positions to satraps who abandoned the rebellion proved more effective than military pressure in ending the revolt. Artaxerxes' willingness to negotiate with the rebels, rather than demanding their unconditional surrender, reflected his understanding of the empire's limitations, while demonstrating the pragmatic approach that had characterized Persian governance since the time of Cyrus the Great. The Egyptian rebellion that began around 404 BCE and persisted for nearly 6 decades represented an even more serious challenge to Persian authority, creating an independent kingdom that controlled one of the empire's wealthiest provinces while inspiring resistance movements throughout the African territories. The rebel pharaoh Amyrtaeus, claiming descent from the ancient Egyptian dynasties, had succeeded in expelling Persian forces from the Nile Delta and establishing an independent government at Sais. His successors, including Nepherites I and Hakor, continued the resistance while developing military capabilities that enabled them to repel repeated Persian attempts at reconquest. The The Egyptian rebels' success in maintaining their independence for such an extended period demonstrated the practical difficulties of governing distant provinces, while revealing the limitations of Persian military power when faced with determined local resistance. The Persian attempts to reconquer Egypt during Artaxerxes II's reign revealed both the empire's continuing ambitions and the practical obstacles that prevented their achievement. The king assembled substantial expeditionary forces, including Persian core units, Greek mercenaries, and contingents from loyal provinces, but these armies repeatedly failed to achieve decisive victories against the Egyptian defenders. The Nile Delta's geography favoured defensive operations, with its network of waterways and fortified cities providing natural obstacles that Persian forces struggled to overcome. The Egyptian rebels had also learned from previous Persian tactics, employing Greek military advisors and adopting defensive strategies that maximised their advantages while minimising Persian strengths. The financial costs of the repeated Egyptian campaigns placed enormous strain on the imperial treasury, forcing Artaxerxes to raise taxes throughout the empire, while reducing expenditures on other priorities. The Persian court's decision to continue these expensive operations despite their limited success reflected both the strategic importance of Egypt and the psychological necessity of demonstrating that Persian authority could not be permanently challenged. The province's wealth from grain production and trade had made it essential to the empire's economic stability, while its loss encouraged other subject peoples to consider rebellion as a viable option for achieving independence. The emergence of Macedon as a significant power in the Balkans during the mid-4th century BCE initially attracted little attention from the Persian court, which remained focused on internal rebellions and the ongoing struggle to reconquer Egypt. Philip II's accession to the Macedonian throne in 359 BCE coincided with Artaxerxes II's death and the succession of his son Artaxerxes III, creating a period of transition that prevented either empire from fully appreciating the threat posed by the other. The new Persian king inherited an empire weakened by decades of internal conflict and external challenges, while Philip assumed control of a kingdom that possessed significant military potential but lacked the resources and organisation necessary to challenge major powers. Artaxerxes III's character differed markedly from his father's diplomatic approach to imperial governance, reflecting both personal temperament and the changed circumstances that confronted the empire in the mid-4th century BCE. The new king had witnessed the costs of accommodation and negotiation during the Satraps' revolt and the Egyptian rebellion, concluding that decisive military action was necessary to restore imperial authority and deter future challenges. His reputation for ruthlessness and determination had been established during his service as a provincial governor, where he had employed harsh measures to maintain order while demonstrating the military capabilities that would characterize his reign. The Persian nobility's acceptance of his succession reflected their understanding that the empire's survival required strong leadership capable of addressing the multiple threats that confronted imperial authority. The new king's first priority involved completing the reconquest of Egypt, which had remained independent for over half a century despite repeated Persian attempts at restoration. Artaxerxes III understood that success in Egypt would demonstrate Persian military recovery while providing the financial resources necessary to address other challenges facing the empire. The king's preparations for the Egyptian campaign revealed both his strategic understanding and his willingness to employ whatever methods were necessary to achieve imperial objectives. The assembly of the largest Persian army since Xerxes' invasion of Greece demonstrated the empire's continuing military capabilities, while the recruitment of substantial Greek mercenary forces indicated the king's pragmatic approach to warfare. The Persian invasion of Egypt in 343 BCE represented the culmination of decades of preparation and the most serious attempt at a reconquest since the original rebellion. The Persian army, commanded by Artaxerxes III personally, included elite units from throughout the empire, alongside substantial contingents of Greek mercenaries and specialized siege equipment designed to overcome Egyptian defensive positions. The force's composition reflected lessons learned from previous failed campaigns, with particular attention to the naval capabilities necessary for operations in the Nile Delta, and the engineering expertise required for siege warfare against fortified cities. The Persian strategy for the Egyptian campaign involved systematic reduction of rebel strongholds, while preventing the defenders from concentrating their forces for decisive engagements. The Persian commanders understood that Egyptian resistance depended on their ability to maintain control over key cities and waterways, making the capture of strategic positions more important than achieving tactical victories in open battle. The Persian forces advanced methodically through the delta, employing coordinated land and naval operations to isolate Egyptian garrisons while maintaining secure supply lines with their bases in the Levant. The siege of Pelusium, the fortress city that controlled the eastern approach to the Nile Delta, represented the campaign's most critical engagement. The Egyptian defenders, led by experienced Greek mercenary commanders, had strengthened the city's fortifications and assembled substantial forces for its defense. The Persian assault required sophisticated coordination of infantry, cavalry, and naval forces, while employing siege engines and engineering works that demonstrated the empire's advanced military technology. The city's fall after several months of resistance eliminated the primary obstacle to Persian penetration of the delta, while providing access to the waterways that connected the region's major population centres. The Persian advance through the delta encountered fierce resistance from Egyptian forces that employed guerrilla tactics and defensive strategies designed to maximize the invaders' logistical difficulties. The Persian commanders responded by establishing fortified bases at strategic locations, while maintaining aggressive patrol activities that prevented the Egyptians from organizing coordinated resistance. The systematic destruction of irrigation systems and agricultural infrastructure created pressure on the civilian population, while denying resources to the rebel forces. These harsh measures reflected Artaxerxes III's determination to achieve decisive victory regardless of the costs imposed on the local population. The capture of Memphis in 342 BCE marked the effective end of Egyptian independence and the restoration of Persian control over the Nile Valley. The ancient capital's fall eliminated the last major centre of organised resistance, while providing the Persians with access to the wealth and administrative records necessary for re-establishing imperial governance. The Persian treatment of the captured city demonstrated both the king's ruthlessness and his understanding of the measures necessary to prevent future rebellions. The execution of prominent Egyptian leaders and the deportation of potential troublemakers to distant provinces eliminated the leadership that might have organised future resistance movements. The restoration of Persian control over Egypt provided Artaxerxes III with substantial financial resources and enhanced prestige that enabled him to address other challenges facing the empire. The province's wealth from grain production and trade had made it essential to imperial economic stability, while its reconquest demonstrated Persian military capabilities to potential enemies throughout the Mediterranean region. The king's personal leadership of the successful campaign enhanced his reputation among the Persian nobility, while providing him with the credibility necessary to implement additional reforms designed to strengthen imperial authority. The Persian suppression of the remaining resistance in the Egyptian territories required systematic operations that extended Persian control throughout the Nile Valley and into Nubia. The rebel forces that had maintained independence in Upper Egypt were gradually eliminated through coordinated military operations that combined direct assault with diplomatic pressure on local leaders. The Persian commanders employed harsh measures against communities that had supported the rebellion, while offering incentives to those who accepted imperial authority. This combination of punishment and reward reflected the traditional Persian approach to governing conquered territories while adapting to the specific challenges posed by Egyptian resistance. The administrative reforms implemented in Egypt following its reconquest revealed Artaxerxes III's understanding of the factors that had enabled the rebellion to persist for so many decades. The new Persian administration employed more direct control over provincial governance while reducing the autonomy that had previously enabled local leaders to organize resistance movements. The appointment of Persian officials to key positions eliminated the Egyptian administrative class that had provided leadership for the independence movement, while ensuring that imperial policies would be implemented according to royal directives rather than local interests. The financial benefits of the Egyptian reconquest enabled Artaxerxes III to address other challenges facing the empire, while demonstrating the economic importance of maintaining control over wealthy provinces. The tribute payments and tax revenues from Egypt provided substantial resources for military operations and administrative reforms throughout the empire. The king's decision to invest these resources in strengthening imperial defences and suppressing remaining rebellions reflected his strategic understanding of the interconnected nature of the empire's various challenges. The Persian attention to Egyptian affairs during the 340 BCE created opportunities for other powers to advance their own interests, while imperial resources were concentrated on the reconquest campaign. Philip II of Macedon had been steadily expanding his kingdom's territory and influence throughout the Balkans, employing military innovations and diplomatic strategies that enabled him to overcome traditional Greek resistance to Macedonian expansion. The Persian court's focus on internal challenges prevented adequate attention to these developments, creating a strategic blind spot that would prove costly in the coming decades. Philip's military reforms had transformed the Macedonian army into a professional force capable of challenging the military systems that had dominated ancient warfare for centuries. The development of the Macedonian phalanx, with its longer spears and more flexible organisation, provided tactical advantages over traditional Greek hoplite formations, while maintaining the discipline and coordination necessary for complex operations. The integration of cavalry, infantry and missile troops created a combined arms system that could adapt to different battlefield conditions while maintaining the offensive capabilities necessary for rapid conquest of enemy territories. The Macedonian conquest of the Greek city-states during the 340s and 330s BCE eliminated the political fragmentation that had characterized the region for centuries while creating a unified power capable of challenging Persian authority in the eastern Mediterranean. Philip's victory at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCE established Macedonian hegemony over mainland Greece, while demonstrating the effectiveness of his military innovations against traditional Greek tactical methods. The formation of the League of Corinth under Macedonian leadership provided Philip with the institutional framework necessary for coordinating Greek military resources while maintaining the appearance of voluntary cooperation rather than direct conquest. The Persian response to Macedonian expansion revealed both the empire's continuing intelligence capabilities and the limitations imposed by competing priorities and resource constraints. Persian agents operating in Greece provided detailed reports about Philip's military innovations and political achievements, enabling the royal court to assess the potential threat posed by Macedonian expansion. However, the empire's involvement in Egyptian affairs and the ongoing challenges of maintaining control over rebellious provinces prevented the allocation of adequate resources to counter Macedonian activities in their early stages. The Persian diplomatic efforts to counter Macedonian expansion employed traditional strategies of supporting Philip's enemies while avoiding direct military confrontation that might have united the Greeks against the common Persian threat. Persian gold funded anti-Macedonian coalitions in Greece, while Persian agents worked to exploit the political divisions that had historically prevented Greek unity. These efforts achieved some success in delaying Macedonian expansion while providing the Persian court with valuable intelligence about Greek political dynamics and military capabilities. The assassination of Philip II in 336 BCE created a succession crisis in Macedon that temporarily reduced the threat posed by the kingdom's expansion while providing the Persian Empire with opportunities to strengthen its defences and address internal challenges. The new Macedonian king Alexander was only 20 years old and faced immediate challenges from Greek cities that sought to exploit the succession crisis to regain their independence. The Persian court's initial assessment suggested that the young king would be unable to maintain his father's achievements while dealing with the complex political and military challenges that confronted Macedonian authority. The Persian preparations for potential conflict with Macedon revealed both the empire's continuing military capabilities and the strategic thinking that guided imperial policy during this critical period. Xerxes III understood that Macedonian expansion toward Asia Minor would eventually threaten Persian control over the crucial territories that connected the empire's European and Asian possessions. The king's decision to strengthen the defences of the western satrapies while maintaining substantial military forces in the region reflected his understanding of the strategic importance of these territories to imperial security. The Persian military preparations included the recruitment of substantial Greek mercenary forces, reflecting the empire's recognition of the tactical advantages that professional soldiers possessed over traditional levy troops. The Persian commanders had learned from their experiences in Egypt and other conflicts that success against well-organised enemies required forces that combined Persian strategic capabilities with Greek tactical expertise. The integration of these mercenary units into the imperial military system created new challenges for command and control, while providing enhanced capabilities for operations against sophisticated opponents. The Persian intelligence networks that had been developed during decades of involvement in Greek affairs provided detailed information about Macedonian military capabilities and strategic intentions. Persian agents operating throughout the Greek world reported on Alexander's preparations for Asian campaigns while assessing the loyalty of various Greek cities to the Macedonian cause. This intelligence enabled the Persian court to develop defensive strategies that took advantage of Greek political divisions while preparing for the military challenges that would inevitably arise from Macedonian expansion. The death of Artaxerxes III in 338 BCE, allegedly through poisoning by the eunuch Bagoas, created another succession crisis that weakened Persian ability to respond effectively to the growing Macedonian threat. The king's energetic efforts to restore imperial authority had achieved significant success in Egypt and other rebellious provinces, but his death eliminated the strong leadership that had characterized this period of recovery. The succession of his son Arses, who took the throne name Artaxerxes IV, brought a young and inexperienced ruler to power at a critical moment when the empire faced its most serious external threat since the Greek invasions of the previous century. The brief reign of Arses, lasting only 2 years before his own assassination, demonstrated the continuing instability within the Persian court and the extent to which powerful officials had accumulated influence that rivaled royal authority. The eunuch Bagoas, who had allegedly orchestrated the deaths of both Artaxerxes III and his son, represented the corruption and palace intrigue that had weakened the empire's leadership during this critical period. The Persian nobility's inability to prevent these assassinations revealed the breakdown of the institutional mechanisms that had previously ensured orderly succession while maintaining imperial stability. The accession of Darius III in 336 BCE brought to the throne a ruler who possessed the personal capabilities necessary for effective leadership, but inherited an empire that faced unprecedented challenges from both internal weakness and external threats. The new king, originally named Codomanus, had demonstrated military competence as a provincial governor, while earning respect from the Persian nobility through his personal courage and administrative skills. His selection by the surviving members of the royal family reflected their understanding that the empire's survival required strong leadership capable of addressing the multiple crises that confronted imperial authority. Darius III's initial efforts to restore imperial stability focused on eliminating the court corruption that had enabled the recent assassinations, while strengthening the administrative systems necessary for effective governance. The new king's execution of Bagoas and other officials implicated in the palace conspiracies demonstrated his determination to restore royal authority, while sending clear messages about the consequences of disloyalty. The Persian nobility's support for these measures reflected their understanding that the empire's survival depended on maintaining institutional stability while addressing the external threats that confronted imperial security. The Persian diplomatic efforts to counter the growing Macedonian threat employed both traditional strategies and innovative approaches that reflected the empire's sophisticated understanding of international politics. Persian agents worked to encourage Greek resistance to Macedonian expansion, while providing financial support to anti-Macedonian coalitions throughout the Mediterranean region. The Persian court also initiated diplomatic contacts with other powers that might be concerned about Macedonian expansion, including the Scythians, Thracians, and various Italian peoples who had reason to fear the growth of Macedonian influence. The Persian military preparations for the anticipated conflict with Macedon revealed both the empire's continuing capabilities and the challenges of coordinating defensive operations across such vast territories. Darius III assembled substantial forces in the western satrapies, while strengthening the fortifications and supply systems necessary for sustained military operations. The Persian strategy involved utilizing the empire's vast resources and territorial depth to absorb initial Macedonian attacks, while organizing the coordinated response necessary to defeat the invasion. The king's confidence in this approach reflected both his understanding of Persian military capabilities and his assessment of the challenges that would confront any force attempting to conquer such extensive territories. The Persian recruitment of Greek mercenaries for the anticipated conflict demonstrated the empire's pragmatic approach to military organization, while reflecting the lessons learned from previous encounters with Greek tactical methods. The Persian commanders understood that success against Macedonian forces would require troops capable of matching their tactical innovations, while maintaining the discipline and coordination necessary for complex operations. The substantial payments offered to Greek mercenaries reflected both the empire's financial resources and the strategic importance placed on acquiring these specialized military capabilities. The Persian naval preparations included efforts to maintain control over the eastern Mediterranean, while preventing Macedonian forces from establishing secure supply lines for operations in Asia Minor. The Persian fleet, composed primarily of Phoenician and Cypriot vessels, possessed the capabilities necessary for challenging Macedonian naval operations, while supporting Persian land forces operating along the Anatolian coast. The coordination of these naval and land operations required sophisticated planning and communication systems that tested the empire's administrative capabilities while demonstrating the strategic thinking that guided Persian defensive preparations. The assassination of Philip II at his daughter's wedding in 336 BCE sent shockwaves throughout the ancient world, but nowhere were the implications more carefully analysed than in the Persian court at Persepolis. Darius III and his advisors initially viewed the Macedonian succession crisis as a divine opportunity to eliminate the growing threat from the north, while the young Alexander struggled to consolidate his authority over a restive Greek coalition. Persian intelligence reports described widespread rebellions erupting across the Greek mainland, with Thebes leading a coordinated effort to throw off Macedonian domination and restore the traditional independence of the city-states. The Persian king authorized substantial financial support for these rebellions, dispatching agents with chests of gold darics to fund anti-Macedonian resistance, while preparing military forces to exploit the anticipated collapse of Philip's empire. The speed and brutality with which Alexander suppressed the Greek rebellions, culminating in the complete destruction of Thebes in 335 BCE, forced a dramatic reassessment of the Macedonian threat within Persian strategic planning. The young king's decision to sell the entire Theban population into slavery while razing the city to its foundations, demonstrated a ruthlessness that exceeded even his father's reputation for harsh measures against defeated enemies. Persian observers noted that Alexander's tactical innovations during the siege had overcome defensive positions that had been considered impregnable, employing coordinated infantry assaults supported by siege engines that represented significant advances in military technology. The psychological impact of Thebes' destruction on other Greek cities eliminated further resistance to Macedonian authority, while providing Alexander with the secure base necessary for launching operations against the Persian Empire. The Persian defensive preparations intensified dramatically following Alexander's demonstration of his military capabilities, with Darius III implementing comprehensive reforms designed to maximize the empire's advantages in the anticipated conflict. The king understood that Persian success would depend on utilizing the empire's vast territorial extent and enormous population to absorb initial Macedonian attacks, while organizing the coordinated response necessary to defeat the invasion. Persian military doctrine emphasized the importance of avoiding decisive battles until the invaders had been weakened by extended supply lines and continuous harassment, allowing the empire's superior numbers and resources to achieve victory through attrition rather than direct confrontation. The Persian recruitment efforts for the coming war drew upon military traditions and resources from across the empire's vast territories, assembling forces that represented the greatest diversity of tactical methods and fighting styles ever concentrated in a single army. Scythian horse archers from the steppes beyond the Oxus River brought mobility and harassment capabilities that had proven effective against previous invaders, while Indian war elephants provided shock power that no enemy had previously encountered in significant numbers. The Persian core units, composed of the Immortals and other elite formations, maintained the discipline and equipment standards that had sustained the empire's military reputation for over 2 centuries, equipped with scale armour, composite bows, and the curved swords that had become synonymous with Persian military prowess. The Persian intelligence networks operating throughout the Greek world provided Darius III with detailed information about Alexander's military innovations and strategic intentions, enabling the royal court to develop defensive strategies that took advantage of Greek political divisions while preparing for the specific challenges posed by Macedonian tactical methods. Persian agents reported that Alexander's army combined traditional Greek hoplite formations with cavalry units trained in new tactical doctrines that emphasize mobility and coordination between different types of troops. The Macedonian phalanx, with its longer spears and more flexible organization, represented a significant evolution from traditional Greek infantry tactics, while the companion cavalry provided offensive capabilities that exceeded anything previously seen in Greek warfare. The Persian financial preparations for the war involved mobilizing the empire's vast wealth while implementing new taxation systems designed to support the enormous military forces that would be required to defeat the Macedonian invasion. The royal treasury at Persepolis contained accumulated wealth from over 2 centuries of imperial expansion, including tribute payments from dozens of provinces and the profits from extensive trade networks that connected India with the Mediterranean. Persian administrators calculated that the empire's financial resources exceeded those of any potential enemy by orders of magnitude, providing the means to recruit substantial mercenary forces while maintaining the logistical systems necessary for coordinated military operations across vast distances. The Persian diplomatic efforts to isolate Macedon from potential allies employed both traditional strategies and innovative approaches that reflected the empire's sophisticated understanding of international politics. Persian ambassadors travelled throughout the Mediterranean world, offering substantial financial incentives to any power willing to oppose Macedonian expansion, while exploiting existing rivalries and territorial disputes that might be turned against Alexander's ambitions. The Persian court initiated negotiations with Scythian tribes north of the Black Sea, Celtic chieftains in Western Europe, and various Italian peoples who had reason to fear the growth of Macedonian influence, creating a network of potential allies that could threaten Alexander's supply lines and distract his attention from the primary Persian territories. Alexander's crossing of the Hellespont in the spring of 334 BCE marked the beginning of the most ambitious military campaign in ancient history, bringing together forces that would determine the fate of two great civilizations. The Macedonian army that landed on the Asian shore at Abydos numbered approximately 35,000 men, including 5,000 cavalry and 30,000 infantry, supported by a fleet of 160 ships that provided essential logistical capabilities for operations in hostile territory. The force's composition reflected Alexander's understanding of the challenges involved in conquering the Persian Empire, combining the tactical innovations developed by his father with specialized units recruited from throughout the Greek world and beyond. The Persian response to Alexander's landing revealed both the empire's continuing military capabilities and the strategic challenges involved in coordinating defensive operations across such vast territories. Arsits, the satrap of Hellespontine Phrygia, assembled a substantial force of Persian cavalry and Greek mercenaries at the Granicus River, choosing a defensive position that maximized his advantages while forcing Alexander to conduct a difficult river crossing under enemy fire. The Persian strategy involved utilizing superior cavalry numbers to prevent the Macedonians from establishing secure bridgeheads, while employing Greek mercenary infantry to counter Alexander's phalanx formations in direct combat. The Battle of the Granicus River in May 334 BCE demonstrated both the tactical innovations that would characterize Alexander's campaigns and the limitations of traditional Persian military doctrine when confronted with coordinated combined arms operations. The Persian cavalry, positioned along the eastern bank of the river, initially succeeded in preventing Macedonian attempts to establish crossings through devastating charges that inflicted heavy casualties on the advancing infantry. Persian commanders had calculated that the river's steep banks and swift current would channel Macedonian attacks into predictable patterns that could be countered through concentrated cavalry charges, supported by archer fire from the heights above the water. Alexander's tactical solution to the river crossing problem involved a coordinated assault that combined diversionary attacks with concentrated force at the point of main effort, demonstrating the flexibility and innovation that would characterize his military leadership throughout the Persian campaigns. The Macedonian king personally led the companion cavalry in a flanking maneuver that crossed the river at an unexpected location, while his infantry commanders maintained pressure along the entire front to prevent Persian forces from concentrating against the main attack. The Persian cavalry, caught between multiple threats and unable to coordinate their response effectively, found themselves engaged in individual combats that negated their numerical advantages while exposing them to the superior training and equipment of the Macedonian units. The collapse of Persian resistance at the Granicus resulted from the death of key commanders and the breakdown of coordination between cavalry and infantry units that had been positioned to support each other. Arsits and several other Persian nobles died in the fierce fighting along the riverbank, eliminating the leadership necessary for organizing continued resistance while demoralizing the remaining forces. The Greek mercenaries fighting for the Persians, isolated by the cavalry's defeat and facing annihilation by Alexander's advancing phalanx, attempted to surrender but were largely massacred on Alexander's orders as punishment for their betrayal of Greek interests. This harsh treatment of Greek mercenaries would become a consistent pattern throughout Alexander's campaigns, reflecting both his propaganda needs and his understanding of the psychological warfare necessary to discourage further Greek cooperation with Persian forces. The Persian defeat at the Granicus eliminated the primary obstacle to Macedonian penetration of western Anatolia, while demonstrating the tactical superiority of Alexander's military system over traditional Persian methods. The battle's outcome convinced many Greek cities along the Anatolian coast that resistance to Macedonian expansion was futile, leading to widespread surrenders that, accelerated Alexander's advance while providing him with additional resources and strategic positions. The Persian garrisons in these cities, isolated and outnumbered, generally chose to evacuate rather than face siege warfare that would inevitably result in their destruction. The Macedonian advance through western Anatolia during the summer and autumn of 334 BCE revealed both the empire's internal weaknesses and the challenges involved in governing such diverse populations across vast distances. Many Greek cities welcomed Alexander as a liberator from Persian rule, providing him with supplies and local knowledge while demonstrating the extent to which Persian authority had depended on military force rather than genuine popular support. The Persian administrative apparatus in these regions, built around appointed governors and garrison forces, collapsed rapidly when confronted with organised resistance, revealing the shallow roots of imperial control in territories that had been conquered rather than integrated into the Persian system. The siege of Halicarnassus during the winter of 333 BCE represented Alexander's first major test against a well-fortified Persian position, defended by experienced commanders with adequate resources and time for preparation. The city's strategic position on the Carian coast made it essential for Persian naval operations in the eastern Aegean, while its massive fortifications and substantial garrison provided the defenders with significant advantages over besieging forces. Memnon of Rhodes, the Greek mercenary commander leading the Persian defence, had strengthened the city's walls and assembled a force that included both Persian troops and Greek mercenaries with extensive experience in siege warfare. The Persian defensive strategy at Halicarnassus employed innovative tactics that combined traditional siege defence methods with offensive operations designed to disrupt Macedonian siege works and maintain communication with Persian naval forces operating in the surrounding waters. The defenders constructed elaborate earthworks and counter-siege devices that neutralised many of Alexander's siege engines, while conducting regular sorties that inflicted casualties on the besieging forces and prevented the establishment of secure blockade lines. The Persian naval forces, commanded by experienced Phoenician and Cypriot captains, maintained supply lines to the city while threatening Macedonian communications with their bases in western Anatolia. Alexander's eventual capture of Halicarnassus required the employment of siege techniques that pushed ancient military engineering to its limits, demonstrating both the technological capabilities of his forces and the determination that would characterize his approach to seemingly impossible challenges. The Macedonian siege works included massive earthen ramps that enabled direct assault against the city's walls, while specialised siege engines provided the firepower necessary to breach fortifications that had been considered impregnable. The coordination of these engineering efforts with direct military operations required sophisticated planning and communication systems that tested the capabilities of Alexander's staff, while providing valuable experience for the greater challenges that lay ahead. The fall of Halicarnassus eliminated the last major Persian stronghold in western Anatolia, while providing Alexander with naval facilities that enhanced his strategic position for future operations. The city's capture demonstrated that even the strongest Persian defensive positions could be overcome through the application of superior siege techniques and sustained military pressure. The Persian garrison's evacuation by sea, rather than fighting to the death, reflected the pragmatic approach that characterized Persian military leadership, while preserving experienced troops for future operations. The Persian strategic response to the loss of western Anatolia involved a fundamental shift from defensive operations to offensive strategies designed to exploit Alexander's extended supply lines and the political instability that Persian agents hoped to foment in his rear areas. Darius III authorized substantial financial support for anti-Macedonian activities throughout the Greek world, while assembling the largest army in Persian history for a decisive confrontation that would determine the war's outcome. the Persian king understood that allowing Alexander to continue his advance unchallenged would eventually result in the loss of the empire's most important provinces, making immediate action necessary despite the risks involved in committing the empire's military resources to a single decisive battle. The Persian army that assembled in northern Syria during the spring of 333 BCE represented the full military might of the Achaemenid Empire, drawing contingents from across the vast territories that stretch from India to Egypt. The force included approximately 100,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry, organised according to traditional Persian military doctrine, but equipped with improved weapons and armour that reflected lessons learned from previous encounters with Greek tactical methods. The Persian core units, composed of the Immortals and other elite formations, maintained their traditional equipment and training while being supplemented by specialised troops recruited from throughout the empire's diverse territories. The Persian strategy for the anticipated battle involved utilising superior numbers to envelop Alexander's smaller force while employing the empire's diverse military capabilities to counter specific Macedonian tactical advantages. Persian cavalry units, drawn from the steppes of Central Asia and the Iranian plateau, provided mobility and shock power that exceeded anything in Alexander's army, while specialised infantry formations from various provinces offered tactical flexibility that could adapt to different battlefield conditions. The Persian commanders had studied reports of Alexander's previous battles, developing countermeasures designed to neutralise the tactical innovations that had proven so effective against traditional Persian forces. The Battle of Issus in November 333 BCE took place on terrain that favoured neither side decisively, forcing both armies to adapt their tactical doctrines to the specific challenges posed by the narrow coastal plain between the mountains and the sea. Darius III had chosen this position to limit Alexander's ability to employ flanking manoeuvres while maximising the impact of Persian numerical superiority in direct frontal combat. The Persian battle line extended across the entire width of the plain, with cavalry units positioned on both flanks and the elite infantry formations concentrated in the centre, where they could engage Alexander's phalanx in decisive combat. Alexander's tactical response to the Persian deployment demonstrated the flexibility and innovation that distinguished his military leadership from traditional Greek approaches to battlefield command. Rather than accepting the direct frontal battle that Persian strategy demanded, Alexander concentrated his elite forces for a decisive attack against the Persian left flank, while using his phalanx to fix the enemy centre and prevent reinforcement of the threatened sector. The Macedonian cavalry, led by Alexander personally, executed a coordinated charge that broke through the Persian line and created the tactical opportunity for exploiting the breakthrough to achieve complete victory. The Persian collapse at Issus resulted from the breakdown of command and control systems that had been designed for traditional set-piece battles rather than the fluid tactical situations that Alexander's innovations created. The death of key Persian commanders during the initial cavalry engagement eliminated the leadership necessary for coordinating defensive responses to the Macedonian breakthrough, while the rapid pace of Alexander's advance prevented the implementation of contingency plans that might have restored Persian tactical coherence. Darius III's personal flight from the battlefield, abandoning his family and the royal regalia, demoralised the remaining Persian forces while providing Alexander with propaganda victories that enhanced his reputation throughout the ancient world. The Persian defeat at Issus eliminated the empire's primary field army, while demonstrating the tactical superiority of Macedonian military methods over traditional Persian approaches to warfare. The battle's outcome convinced many Persian provincial governors that continued resistance was futile, leading to widespread surrenders that accelerated Alexander's advance while providing him with additional resources and strategic positions. The capture of the Persian royal family provided Alexander with valuable hostages while demonstrating his magnanimity toward defeated enemies. a propaganda advantage that would prove crucial in his efforts to legitimize his conquest of the Persian Empire. The siege of Tyre during 332 BCE represented Alexander's most ambitious military undertaking to date, requiring the construction of engineering works that exceeded anything previously attempted in ancient warfare. The island city's position approximately half a mile offshore provided natural defensive advantages that had enabled it to resist previous sieges by the greatest military powers of the ancient world, including the Babylonians and Persians. The Tyrian defenders, confident in their city's impregnability, rejected Alexander's demands for surrender while preparing for a siege that they believed would ultimately force the Macedonians to abandon their efforts and continue their advance toward Egypt. Alexander's solution to the challenge posed by Tyre's island position involved the construction of a massive causeway that would connect the mainland to the city, enabling his siege engines to approach the walls while providing a secure base for sustained military operations. The engineering project required the coordination of thousands of workers over several months, moving enormous quantities of stone and earth to create a structure that was nearly 200 feet wide and extended across the deep waters of the harbour. The Persian naval forces operating in the eastern Mediterranean attempted to disrupt this construction through coordinated attacks, but Alexander's growing fleet, reinforced by ships from Greek cities and Phoenician communities that had submitted to his authority, gradually gained control of the waters around the city. The Persian response to Alexander's siege of Tyre revealed both the empire's continuing naval capabilities and the strategic challenges involved in coordinating defensive operations across such vast distances. The Persian fleet, commanded by experienced Phoenician and Cypriot captains, possessed superior numbers and local knowledge that initially provided significant advantages over Alexander's improvised naval forces. However, the gradual defection of Phoenician cities to Alexander's cause eliminated many of the empire's most experienced naval commanders, while providing the Macedonians with the ships and crews necessary to challenge Persian control of the eastern Mediterranean. The fall of Tyre after a siege lasting 7 months demonstrated Alexander's determination to overcome any obstacle to his advance, while providing him with naval facilities that would prove essential for his subsequent operations in Egypt and beyond. The city's capture required the employment of siege techniques that pushed ancient military engineering to its limits, including the construction of siege towers that exceeded 150 feet in height and the use of coordinated naval and land attacks that overwhelmed the defenders' ability to respond effectively. The harsh treatment of the captured city, including the execution of thousands of defenders and the enslavement of the surviving population, demonstrated Alexander's ruthlessness toward those who resisted his authority, while serving as a warning to other cities that might consider opposing his advance. The Macedonian conquest of Egypt during the winter of 332-331 BCE proceeded with remarkable ease, reflecting both the Persian garrison's weakness and the Egyptian population's willingness to accept Alexander as a liberator from Persian rule. The Persian satrap Cambyses, recognizing the futility of resistance after the fall of Tyre and the approach of Alexander's victorious army, surrendered the province without significant fighting. The Egyptian priesthood, which had maintained its hostility to Persian rule throughout the period of imperial control, welcomed Alexander with elaborate ceremonies that proclaimed him as the chosen successor to the pharaonic dynasties and the legitimate ruler of the Nile Valley. Alexander's establishment of Alexandria at the mouth of the Nile represented both a strategic decision to secure his conquests and a visionary recognition of the commercial possibilities that would emerge from connecting the Mediterranean world with the wealth of Egypt and the trade routes extending to India and beyond. The city's location provided natural harbour facilities that could accommodate the largest ships, while offering access to the Nile's transportation network and the agricultural wealth of the Delta region. The urban planning that Alexander initiated, working with experienced architects and engineers, created a city design that would influence urban development throughout the ancient world, while providing a model for the Greek cities that would spread across his conquered territories. The Persian preparations for the decisive battle that would determine the war's outcome involved assembling the largest army in the empire's history, while selecting terrain that would maximise Persian advantages and minimise the tactical innovations that had proven so effective for Alexander in previous encounters. Darius III chose the plain of Gaugamela in northern Mesopotamia, a location that provided adequate space for deploying the empire's vast military resources, while offering level ground that would enable the effective use of cavalry and the specialised weapons that Persian engineers had developed specifically for countering Macedonian tactical methods. The Persian army that assembled at Gaugamela during the summer of 331 BCE represented the empire's final attempt to preserve its independence through military means, drawing upon resources and military traditions from across the vast territories that had been accumulated over 2 centuries of imperial expansion. The force included approximately 250,000 infantry and 40,000 cavalry, organised in formations that reflected both traditional Persian military doctrine and tactical innovations, designed to counter the specific challenges posed by Alexander's army. The Persian engineers had prepared the battlefield with obstacles and modifications designed to channel Macedonian attacks into predetermined killing zones while providing optimal conditions for Persian cavalry charges and the employment of specialised weapons, including scythed chariots and war elephants. The Battle of Gaugamela on October 1st, 331 BCE, represented the climactic encounter between 2 military systems that embodied different approaches to warfare and imperial organisation. The Persian strategy involved utilising overwhelming numerical superiority to envelop Alexander's smaller force, while employing the empire's diverse military capabilities to counter specific Macedonian tactical advantages. Darius III personally commanded the centre of the Persian line, surrounded by the elite immortals and other guard units, while his most experienced cavalry commanders led the flanking forces that were expected to achieve the decisive breakthrough that would determine the battle's outcome. Alexander's tactical approach to the battle demonstrated the culmination of the military innovations that had been developed during his campaigns against the Persian Empire, combining traditional Macedonian strengths with adaptations that reflected lessons learned from previous encounters with Persian forces. The Macedonian king concentrated his elite cavalry for a decisive attack against the Persian left flank, while using his phalanx and allied forces to maintain pressure across the entire front, preventing Persian commanders from concentrating their forces against his main effort. The coordination of these complex manoeuvres required sophisticated communication systems and exceptional training that reflected the professional military organisation that Alexander had inherited from his father and refined through continuous campaigning. The Persian collapse at Gaugamela resulted from the same factors that had determined the outcome at Issus, with the breakdown of command and control systems enabling Alexander's tactical innovations to achieve decisive results against numerically superior forces. The death of key Persian commanders during the initial phases of the battle eliminated the leadership necessary for implementing contingency plans, while the rapid pace of Alexander's advance prevented the coordination of defensive responses that might have restored Persian tactical coherence. Darius III's second flight from the battlefield, abandoning his army and the symbols of imperial authority, effectively ended Persian resistance, while providing Alexander with the legitimacy necessary to claim the throne of the Achaemenid Empire. The aftermath of Gaugamela witnessed the complete collapse of organised Persian resistance in the empire's western provinces, with provincial governors and military commanders surrendering their positions rather than facing the inevitable destruction that would result from continued opposition to Alexander's advance. The Macedonian occupation of Babylon, Susa and Persepolis proceeded without significant resistance, providing Alexander with access to the accumulated wealth of the Persian Empire, while demonstrating the extent to which imperial authority had depended on military force rather than genuine popular support. The enormous quantities of gold and silver captured in these cities provided Alexander with the financial resources necessary to fund his future campaigns, while demonstrating the material rewards that awaited those who accepted his authority. The Persian treasuries at Persepolis alone contained over 120,000 talents of gold and silver, representing the accumulated wealth of generations of Achaemenid rulers, and providing tangible evidence of the empire's prosperity under Persian rule. Alexander's adoption of Persian court customs and administrative practices following his conquest of the empire's heartland represented a calculated attempt to legitimize his rule in the eyes of Persian nobles and administrators whose cooperation would be essential for governing such vast territories. The Macedonian king began wearing Persian royal dress during formal ceremonies, adopted the Persian practice of proskynesis, and incorporated Persian nobles into his administration at the highest levels. These cultural adaptations created tensions with his Macedonian companions, who viewed such practices as evidence of their king's corruption by barbarian customs. But they were essential for maintaining the administrative continuity necessary to govern the diverse populations of the former Persian Empire. The Persian administrative apparatus that Alexander inherited represented one of the most sophisticated governmental systems in the ancient world, with established procedures for tax collection, military recruitment, and judicial administration that had been refined over 2 centuries of imperial rule. The satrap system, which had enabled the Persians to govern territories stretching from India to Egypt, provided Alexander with a ready-made framework for imperial administration that required only minor modifications to serve his purposes. The retention of experienced Persian administrators in key positions ensured continuity in day-to-day governance, while providing the local knowledge necessary to maintain order among populations that had little direct experience with Macedonian rule. The policy of cultural fusion that Alexander implemented throughout his conquered territories reflected both practical necessity and genuine conviction that the integration of Greek and Persian traditions would create a stronger and more stable empire. The mass marriages at Susa in 324 BCE, where Alexander and his officers took Persian wives in elaborate ceremonies that combined Greek and Persian wedding customs, symbolized this policy of cultural synthesis. The king's own marriage to Roxana, a Sogdian princess, and later to Stateira, daughter of Darius III, demonstrated his commitment to creating a ruling class that would bridge the cultural divide between conquerors and conquered. The training of Persian youths in Macedonian military methods represented another aspect of Alexander's fusion policy, creating a new generation of soldiers who combined Persian cultural identity with Greek tactical training. These young men, known as the epigoni or successors, were equipped with Macedonian weapons and trained in phalanx formations, but they retained their Persian dress and customs in a visible demonstration of cultural synthesis. The program created approximately 30,000 trained soldiers who could serve alongside Macedonian units, while providing a bridge between the Greek and Persian elements of Alexander's army. The death of Alexander in Babylon in 323 BCE created an immediate succession crisis that would ultimately lead to the fragmentation of his empire among his generals, known as the Diadochi, or Successors. The absence of a clear heir, combined with the vast geographical extent of the conquered territories, made unified control impossible to maintain. The initial attempts to preserve imperial unity under a regency council quickly collapsed, as individual commanders began asserting independent authority over the territories they controlled. Perdiccas, who had been designated as regent, attempted to maintain central control but faced immediate challenges from Ptolemy in Egypt, Antigonus in Anatolia, and other generals who possessed the military resources necessary to establish independent kingdoms. The partition of Alexander's empire among his successors was formalized through a series of agreements that recognized the practical impossibility of maintaining unified control over such vast territories. The settlement of Babylon in 323 BCE and subsequent agreements divided the conquered lands among the most powerful Diadochi, with each general receiving territories that corresponded roughly to the satrapies they had governed during Alexander's lifetime. Ptolemy secured Egypt and the eastern Mediterranean. Antigonus received much of Anatolia and Syria, while Seleucus was initially granted Babylon and the eastern provinces that would eventually become the core of the Seleucid Empire. The Seleucid Empire's inheritance of the Iranian heartland and the eastern territories of Alexander's conquests represented the most direct continuation of Achaemenid imperial traditions, both in terms of territorial extent and administrative practices. Seleucus the Nicator, who had served as one of Alexander's bodyguards and later a satrap of Babylon, possessed intimate knowledge of Persian governmental methods and understood the importance of maintaining continuity with established administrative practices. The Seleucid capital at Seleucia on the Tigris, located near ancient Babylon, symbolized this continuity while providing access to the trade routes that had made Mesopotamia the economic heart of the Persian Empire. The Seleucid administrative system retained many features of the Persian satrap system, with appointed governors exercising authority over vast provinces while maintaining nominal allegiance to the central government. The cultural policies of the early Seleucid kings reflected Alexander's fusion approach, with Greek colonists establishing cities throughout the Iranian plateau, while Persian nobles retained significant influence in regional administration. The Seleucid army combined Macedonian military traditions with Persian and other Asian elements, creating a military system that could adapt to the diverse challenges of governing territories that stretched from Anatolia to India. The gradual Hellenization of former Persian territories proceeded at different rates in different regions, with Greek cultural influence being strongest in the urban centres established by Alexander and his successors. The Greek cities founded throughout the former Persian Empire served as centres of Greek culture and administration, attracting settlers from the Greek homeland while providing focal points for the spread of Greek language, art and intellectual traditions. These cities, including Alexandria in Egypt, Antioch in Syria, and Seleucia in Mesopotamia, became major commercial and cultural centres that facilitated the exchange of ideas and goods between East and West. The syncretism of Greek and Persian cultural elements created new artistic and intellectual traditions that combined the rational inquiry of Greek philosophy with the mystical and religious traditions of the East. The Hellenistic kingdoms that emerged from Alexander's conquests developed distinctive cultural identities that reflected this synthesis, with Persian administrative practices being combined with Greek artistic styles and intellectual methods. The Persian influence on Hellenistic culture was particularly evident in religious practices, with Greek deities being identified with Persian and other Eastern gods in syncretic religious systems that appealed to diverse populations. The economic integration of the former Persian territories under Hellenistic rule created new opportunities for trade and cultural exchange, while generating substantial revenues for the successor kingdoms. The Greek cities established throughout the region served as commercial centres that facilitated trade between the Mediterranean world and the wealth of Asia, while the Persian administrative apparatus provided the organisational framework necessary for collecting taxes and maintaining order across vast territories. The Seleucid Empire's control over the Silk Road and other major trade routes generated enormous wealth that enabled the maintenance of substantial military forces while supporting the elaborate court ceremonies and construction projects that reinforced royal authority. The Persian resistance to Hellenistic rule varied significantly across different regions and time periods, with some areas accepting Greek cultural influence, while others maintained traditional Persian practices and political structures. The eastern provinces of the Seleucid Empire, including Parthia, Bactria, and Sogdiana, proved particularly resistant to Hellenization due to their distance from the Greek cultural centres and their strong nomadic traditions. The Persian nobility in these regions gradually reasserted their independence as Seleucid control weakened, creating autonomous kingdoms that maintained Persian cultural identity while adopting selected Greek administrative and military practices. The rise of the Parthian Empire under Arsaces I, around 247 BCE, marked the beginning of the restoration of Iranian independence and the end of effective Hellenistic control over the Persian heartland. The Parthian conquest of the Seleucid eastern provinces represented more than a simple change of dynasty. It marked the revival of distinctly Iranian political and cultural traditions that had been suppressed but not eliminated during the period of Greek rule. The Parthian rulers, while adopting some Hellenistic practices, consciously positioned themselves as the heirs to the Achaemenid tradition, claiming legitimacy through their restoration of Iranian independence and their resistance to foreign domination. The Parthian military system combined traditional Iranian cavalry tactics with innovations learned from their conflicts with Hellenistic armies, creating a military force that proved capable of challenging Roman expansion in the east. The famous Parthian horse archers, mounted on swift horses and equipped with powerful composite bows, employed hit-and-run tactics that proved devastatingly effective against the heavy infantry formations that had dominated Mediterranean warfare. The Parthian heavy cavalry, known as cataphracts, provided shock power that could break enemy formations while maintaining the mobility necessary for rapid strategic movements across the vast distances of the Iranian plateau. The Parthian administrative system reflected the synthesis of Persian, Greek, and nomadic traditions that characterized the new Iranian Renaissance. The Parthian kings maintained the decentralized governmental structure that had characterized the later Achaemenid period, granting substantial autonomy to local rulers while requiring tribute and military service when needed. This system proved particularly well suited to governing the diverse populations of the Iranian plateau, where tribal traditions remained strong and centralized control had always been difficult to maintain. The cultural revival that accompanied Parthian independence included the restoration of Persian religious practices and the development of new artistic traditions that combined Iranian themes with Hellenistic techniques. The Parthian court became a centre of Persian cultural renewal, with poets and scholars working to preserve and develop the literary traditions that had been maintained during the period of Greek rule. The Parthian kings patronized the construction of temples and palaces that reflected distinctly Iranian architectural styles, while incorporating decorative elements that demonstrated the cultural synthesis that had occurred during the Hellenistic period. The Parthian Empire's expansion westward into Mesopotamia and Syria brought it into direct conflict with the Roman Republic, creating a new balance of power in the ancient Near East that would persist for centuries. The Parthian victory over Crassus at Carrhae in 53 BCE demonstrated that the new Iranian Empire possessed military capabilities that could challenge even the most powerful Mediterranean states. The Roman standards captured at Carrhae became symbols of Parthian resistance to Western expansion, while the battle's outcome established the Euphrates River as the effective boundary between the Roman and Iranian spheres of influence. The Parthian period witnessed the development of new trade networks that connected the Iranian plateau with both the Mediterranean world and the emerging markets of Central Asia and India. The Parthian control over the Silk Road and other major trade routes generated enormous wealth that enabled the maintenance of substantial military forces while supporting the elaborate court ceremonies and construction projects that reinforced royal authority. The Parthian cities of Ctesiphon and Ecbatana became major commercial centres that facilitated the exchange of goods and ideas between East and West, continuing the cosmopolitan traditions that had characterized the Persian Empire under the Achaemenids. The legacy of the Achaemenid Empire extended far beyond its political boundaries and chronological limits, influencing the development of imperial administration, military organization, and cultural synthesis throughout the ancient world. The Persian model of governing diverse populations through accommodation, rather than forced assimilation, provided a template that would be adopted by subsequent empires, including the Roman Empire and the Islamic Caliphates. The Persian emphasis on religious tolerance and cultural diversity created precedents that would influence the development of multicultural societies throughout history. The Persian administrative innovations, including the satrap system, the royal road network, and the standardized monetary system, provided organizational models that would be adopted and adapted by later empires. The Persian approach to imperial governance, which balanced central authority with local autonomy, proved particularly influential in the development of federal systems of government that could accommodate diverse populations across vast territories. The Persian legacy and administrative practice can be traced through the Hellenistic kingdoms, the Roman Empire, and the Islamic caliphates that inherited Persian territories and governmental traditions. The cultural synthesis that began under the Achaemenids and continued through the Hellenistic period created new artistic and intellectual traditions that would influence the development of civilization throughout the ancient world. The Persian contribution to this synthesis included not only administrative and military innovations, but also religious and philosophical ideas that would shape the development of major world religions. The Persian emphasis on the cosmic struggle between good and evil, embodied in Zoroastrian theology, influenced the development of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, while Persian artistic traditions contributed to the development of distinctive regional styles throughout the former empire. The end of the Achaemenid Empire in 330 BCE marked the conclusion of one of history's most significant imperial experiments, but the Persian legacy continued to influence the development of civilization long after the last Achaemenid king had fallen. The empire's contribution to human civilization extended far beyond its military conquests to include fundamental innovations in governance, administration, and cultural synthesis that would shape the development of subsequent empires and civilizations. The Persian model of imperial organization, based on tolerance, accommodation, and the integration of diverse traditions, provided a template for governing multicultural societies that remains relevant to the modern world. The Persian Empire's ultimate significance lies not in its military achievements or territorial extent, but in its demonstration that diverse peoples could coexist within a single political framework while maintaining their distinctive cultural identities. This legacy of tolerance and accommodation, established by Cyrus the Great and maintained by his successors, represents one of the most important contributions of the ancient world to the development of human civilization. The Persian experiment in multicultural empire building provided a model that would influence the development of imperial systems throughout history, from the Roman Empire to the modern nation-state, demonstrating that political unity need not require cultural uniformity.